Please note that this is a wide-reaching conversation around Taiji, and so it does include some late-game spoilers. Additionally, if you are listening only to the audio, there's a video-heavy section about 2 hours into the podcast. I'll give you another warning at that time.
Hi everyone, I'm Gregory, and this is Matthew van Divander, the creator of an open-world puzzle game called Taiji. And to celebrate the 3rd anniversary of Taiji's release, we decided to make a podcast in which I'm going to interview Matthew and ask him a bunch of extremely profound questions about game design, art, and philosophy.
Right. So people might know me, but they probably don't know you. But you were the composer on Taiji. So you composed, let's say, like 90+% of all of the music that you hear in the game. I did a small portion of it, but
I think you did a bit more than 10% in terms of like minutes of music that are in the game, although that's hard to count because of non-linearity of the music. But.
Right. And so you also have like a sort of, I think, unique approach to video game music composition, or at least, I mean, I haven't seen it before, and you've sort of, at this date that the podcast is coming out, should have just released a video essay that's sort of extensively outlining kind of your approach and a lot of the things that you did in Taiji. And I think it's a really interesting essay, so not that I'm encouraging people to immediately switch off this podcast and go over there and watch that, but there will be a link in the description for the video so that you can go watch that if you want to hear more about that, which if you're interested in Taiji, I think it'll be interesting, although there's some other related kind of ideas in there, even though they're not Taiji specific.
Yeah, I put a lot of work. I worked like for over 3 months full time on this video essay, so hopefully it's useful for people.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to me, and it's a lot of stuff that I knew because I was there.
Okay, so you might have noticed that we put white and black t-shirts to reflect the game's, the Taiji's philosophical theme.
Yeah, this was your idea.
And you might wonder why do I have such a depressing text on my t-shirt? It says, "Is it too late to be good?" And that's because, well, my mother gave this t-shirt to me, and she gave it to me because she's not like very happy with what I do with my life. She's like, "Why do you make video games for some nerds? You should instead do something useful." So
I ask myself that every day.
Yeah, so that's this. I think this anecdote is a good introduction to first couple of questions that I have for Matthew. So,
all right.
The first question is: some people say that puzzle games are not meaningful because they're too disconnected from the real world. What would your answer be to that?
Well, I mean, it's always an open question when you're kind of making, I think, any art, I guess, is whether or not it matters or is meaningful. But, you know, at a certain point, you have to kind of find inherent meaning in what you're doing. So I think there's always some inherent meaning, but I do specifically have an approach when I make games that's to try to, like, bring out the thing that's inherently interesting about whatever it is I'm making, rather than like trying to like put in a bunch of my own ideas. And so there's something about when you like design a system in a game and things just come out of that system, especially if they're things that you didn't expect when you had come up with the initial idea, that those are sort of things that are real, right? That they're not just something that I came up with. Now I think like your job as a designer is to try to hopefully allow the audience to relate those things to their real life. And, you know, maybe it's It's certainly questionable whether I did a great job of that in Taiji specifically. A lot of times people don't quite relate Taiji to their real life, but it was certainly something that I was thinking about when I made it. So I don't know if that like answers the question about whether it's disconnected from the real world, but I see there as a connection in that like it is part of the real world that you implement this thing inside the computer, right? It's maybe like a cartoon version of the real world, but you know, it's certainly not my approach that I make. You know, I'm not making Roblox or whatever.
What does that have to do with?
Well, I just mean like I'm not making games that are just like commercial primary pursuits and without any real regard to, I mean, and not to besmirch the people who are making Roblox. I don't really know their motivations. I'm just kind of pulling a random example.
Okay.
Like Fortnite would have been just as good of an example, right? It's like I don't think Fortnite has an aspiration necessarily to be deeply meaningful. It's just trying to be a fun game or whatever. Although there's nothing wrong with fun and entertainment either. I think like there's oftentimes people can look down on that too much.
Okay, but like how do you know that this system is like has any meaning like in the outside of the context of the game?
I mean, I think you kind of don't. I mean, this is a little bit of spoilers for like the ending of The Witness, but I think part of the end of that game is like an admission that maybe you don't know whether or not it has any meaning outside of the game. But you know, I do a lot of things based on feel, so it's like I feel like it's interesting and meaningful, or else I wouldn't feel the need to continue to pursue that idea. Typically, like that's what happens with me is I would drop an idea if I didn't think it was really interesting enough.
Mm-hmm.
Like I certainly wouldn't have worked on Taiji for like 8 years if I didn't think it was meaningful.
All right. If a puzzle game is more connected to the real world, does it make it better? For example, how much do you think Taiji and The Witness are connected to the real world in comparison to Braid? If you want, you may like give examples from some other games if you want.
Right. So I think that it matters, and there's a certain amount of like the line comes down to how kind of esoteric and random and in the weeds of like the implementation details of the game is what the game's making you focus on, right? So it's very tricky to draw that line, but it is again a feel thing, right? So like there's just some things that are like really surprising and interesting, and then there's other things that feel like I'm memorizing a spreadsheet or something, right? So like when I think about like all of the different weapons or armor or something in an RPG, that can be kind of complex and has a lot of stuff to think about, but is not really that related to anything in the real world because it's just a bunch of arbitrarily chosen values the designer just put in there, right? And so like, is it that interesting to care about how to min-max that and like what's the best build and whatever? Like, so I'm not disparaging people that enjoy doing that, but there's a big difference between that kind of thing and maybe more simulation-y kind of things where you're talking about something that's a consequence of the simulation and the game is like exploring that. But that can get esoteric too. So to the specific thing of like Braid versus The Witness, I guess in some ways you could say Braid is more connected to the real world because it's a game that's more about like physics and then like what if time was different in regards to physics, and physics is something that you can easily relate to the real world, whereas The Witness is more about perception, although perception is also something in the real world. It's just more subtle, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. I've heard you say several times something like, I don't care that much whether a game is fun. I care whether it is interesting. So why not go a step further and replace the word interesting with meaningful? Do you think that something being interesting is intrinsically meaningful? Can something be interesting and meaningless at the same time?
I think on the last question of like, can something be interesting and probably meaningless at the same time? The answer is probably yes. So they're probably not the same thing. Because like I said, some people will be interested in trying to min-max the spreadsheet of the RPG equipment or whatever, and like that can be an interesting thing because there's a lot of complexity and things to pull apart and things to explore inside of that space, but it's not inherently meaningful outside of the context of that video game, right? Like that doesn't necessarily even help you with like the next game in the same series, right? Because then it's another arbitrary set of spreadsheets that feed into a system, and that, you know, understanding the like combat system of the game might be more meaningful than understanding like which is the best outfit that I should wear. So as for the broader question of like why not replace interesting with meaningful, well, really the only reason that I would say like that I care about whether it's interesting versus saying that it's fun is because, I mean, part of that is because I'm an old fart, and so I remember a time where everybody was like obsessed with fun, and fun was the most important thing, and who cares if it's da 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 as long as it's fun, right? There's been recently a slight resurgence of that because there's this like clip of Gabe Newell from the documentary for like the 25th anniversary of Half-Life 1 or something, where he's talking about the thought process in the design of that game, which was like, you know, came down to kind of clamping down on the parts of the team that cared about whether something was realistic and instead caring more about whether it was fun. And that's still, for some reason, that's still seen as a really insightful position, and I don't think that it really is. I think that that was probably insightful in the 90s when that game was made, but like, it's true that realism is not the same as fun, but the problem with that is that it suggests that realism is less interesting than fun, or that fun should be the ultimate goal of every video game. Now, I do think that there's been a loss of perspective to some extent, so I can understand why people are very against, like, let's say games that don't care about whether it's fun at all, right? Because there could be games that are too artsy-fartsy and just are doing that at the expense of the player's experience, and it's like not what they signed up for. They wanted to play a game that was fun or something, and that's fine. But the reason I was saying interesting is because I just wanted to push back on the concept of fun being the most important thing, because it's okay if something is not fun in the traditional sense as long as it's like a compelling experience for the player, right? That they would want to continue with, right? So meaningful, compelling, interesting, those are all fine. I don't really have an opinion about which one's better to say. I guess like I would rather people make games that they find interesting, even if they aren't meaningful, because what you find meaningful is to some extent personal, right? Like some people do find probably meaning in analyzing all of those spreadsheets or whatever. You know, there's people who play, the only game they play is Super Mario 64, right? And they're trying to figure out how to get through the whole game without pressing the A button. So to them, that must be an intrinsically meaningful thing, right? So I don't know. Maybe that's too diplomatic, but
Okay. The Johnny Meester has a question. Do you think a puzzle game without an overworld, just the puzzles, can have a narrative, meaning, message?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can. I mean, there's a question whether Taiji has that, even though it has an overworld. I mean, I think it has some narrative, but whether that gets across to the player is unclear. So I don't think those are intrinsically related. Like the reason that I put an overworld in Taiji was not because I thought it would make the game more meaningful, but because I like having exploration as a part of a game, and I liked having that interaction between the environment and the puzzles, and I wanted that in the game. I didn't want just a book of puzzles, right? But certainly, like, a book of puzzles can be meaningful, although you might have to lean more heavily on some other element to add that meaning. You know, maybe you have to put some haikus in there or something. Every time you do a puzzle, you get a little haiku or something that adds some additional meaning. So it's true that, like, if the puzzles are sufficiently abstract, then it's probably hard for most people to play the game to find any kind of, like, narrative type meaning in the game.
Yeah, I mean, like, even if you don't have an overworld, you can put story in the game or something. So I don't see, like, the connection between correlation between having overworld and, like, more meaning.
Yeah, like, it's certainly a context that allows you to add more depth to the game, or more layers of depth to the game, because you can reflect things about the puzzles in the environment in which you find them. But I think you could do that other ways. But like I said, I think it would be hard to do it if it was... Like, you could certainly make a very good game that was just puzzles, right? Like, that's fine. Like, there's a lot of art in just how you organize and present the ideas, even if you're not presenting them in the context of, I have an avatar and I'm running around from puzzle to puzzle.
Okay, so actually, like, someone had a question about, like, why did you put avatar in Taiji? It was supposed to come later, but
Well, I mean, it's a long story, but because originally it was really just that the game was conceived as a different kind of game, and it was going to be more of a Zelda game. So that was why you had an avatar, because there was going to be combat in the game and things like that. In the long run, it was probably just because I sort of shifted the design of the game to be more of a game that was inspired by The Witness more directly. Because originally it was just like, okay, I'm doing this Zelda game and there's going to be puzzles, and then I'm taking a little bit of inspiration from The Witness for how those puzzles might be. But then when I shifted it to be more like a Witness-like game, well, The Witness also utilizes the fact that you have an avatar and you're running around this environment in interesting ways. So it felt like a natural fit. There were already, like, in the very early version of the game, there was some stuff where I was, like, playing with the concept of whether you were, like, walking around on a puzzle panel or whether or not, right? So there were some reasons to want to have an avatar for some of the puzzle designs already.
Can very good puzzles be as meaningful as very good stories?
Right. So this is something that you and I have talked about before, because we were, like, sort of thinking about how good Disco Elysium was. And that some of my favorite games are all story games, or have story components, right? And so I do think that it's very hard to have a game that's very deeply meaningful without story, or without words at all. And I say that having done a game that didn't have words at all. And I don't think that it's because there's not inherent meaning there. It's just there's, like, if you think of, like, getting the player to think about the game in some more meaningful way, as, like, they have to climb this ladder, then words are often kind of the lower rungs on that ladder, to get them there. And the reason I didn't put words in Taiji is because I was afraid that people were just going to focus on the words, and they were going to, like, miss the bigger picture and just think, like, oh, the game is about these words. But yeah, so I guess that's kind of to answer the question directly of whether very good puzzles can be as meaningful as very good stories. probably not without additional context. But it's not to say that they don't have value, but it's like, maybe it's like the context in which I think about puzzles is not just whether they're the best puzzles, but also like how they fit into the overall context of like a game that's trying to be about a certain area of subject matter. I don't know. I didn't explore that kind of thing that deeply in Taiji, so I'm probably not the right person to even answer that question.
Okay. I've heard you say a bunch of times that you don't really like playing puzzle games that much. You're just a fan of games by Jonathan Blow. So can you elaborate on that?
Right. Well, usually I say that because like if I'm streaming on Twitch and playing games, I'm almost always playing puzzle games there, but that's because people don't really care when I'm playing something else. They don't want to watch me play anything except puzzle games. But outside of that, it's like mostly I don't play puzzle games for like my own relaxation time. And I wouldn't rank them for the most part very highly on like my favorite games other than Jonathan Blow's games. So reasons for that, I guess, to some extent is probably because I make puzzle games, and like because when I play a puzzle game, it's very hard to like just separate that part of my brain that like wants to try to improve the thing and just enjoy the thing. So I often find it a very frustrating experience to play most puzzle games because they just have obvious design flaws that irritate me. So it's hard to enjoy them if you're like, I would do this differently. Whereas if I'm playing a game that's like an RPG or it's more story focused or something, I don't really do that kind of thing that much. So I don't go into that mode of thinking like I would have done this differently. Or, you know, there might be some mechanics in the game that irritate me, but it's like, it's just not something I've thought about as closely. So I'm not getting irritated at like specific design decisions that they made that I think are wrong.
But like you've played games for a long time before you started making puzzle games. So did you play puzzle games back then?
I mean, when I was a kid, I played a lot of like Chips Challenge and you know, I don't think there were a lot of more hardcore puzzle solving games. I think to some extent you could call like Donkey Kong on the Game Boy was a little bit of a puzzle game at times. But there were not like a lot of mainstream games that were puzzle games or focused on puzzle solving, I guess I would say. So I didn't play a lot of those until like the big indie boom in like 2008. And at that point, like Braid had come out already. So I did play a lot of puzzle games right after Braid. And there's a few of them that I liked, like The Swapper is still a game from that kind of era that was really good. And Fez is really good, although the complex of reasons why I like Fez is not entirely focused on the puzzles. But that was a big inspiration on Taiji.
Why?
I think that just the overall atmosphere and the feeling of exploration in Fez was a big inspiration. I just liked exploring this world and like scrutinizing the details of the environment, and that it had this sort of like relaxing vibe to the game where you could kind of just sit and you could listen to the music and look at the visuals of the game, and it was a nice experience. So I think that part was like the inspiration that I wanted Taiji to be a similar game where you could kind of just like put it on and relax and like look at it if you wanted to. Or I don't think the like visual part of Taiji quite struck that as often as I would have hoped, but I think certainly with your soundtrack, it's a lot closer to that ideal. What was the original question?
Well, I guess I asked you, did you play puzzle games before you started
right.
making them?
Yeah, so I did then, but like, you know, it was like I was chasing the high of Braid, and there was really nothing that quite lived up to that until The Witness. So I still just kind of put, you know, there's a large category of puzzle games, some of which are standout games, but then there's like Jonathan Blow's games that are on another level. So I don't know, maybe it's just like, it's like when people play Dark Souls and then it like ruined every other game for them, and now every action game is aping Dark Souls. It's like you play this game and then that just changes your perception of like what you want out of that kind of game. And most puzzle games are just not reaching that level. So it's not true that I never play puzzle games. I just wouldn't say that it's like the majority of hours that I spend playing games, right?
Okay.
Because people might assume that from watching streams of me playing stuff, that like, well, that's what he plays, because it's like, well, I tried playing Elden Ring, but nobody cared. Nobody showed up for the stream, so it's just like, well, there's no point in me turning on the stream if nobody's going to show up. I'll just keep playing it offline.
Well, a lot of people, like most people who watch you, are probably some kind of puzzle game developers or designers.
Yeah.
So they get more out of watching you play puzzle games.
No, it makes sense. It's totally fine. It's just like, the only reason I would say that was just try to offset the perception that they would have because of what they've seen me play, right? When really it's like, well, I play that because that's what people want to watch me play, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was thinking about that question a bit, and I thought that, well, I remembered that while you were working on Islands of Insight, you made some rolling block puzzles, and you said that you didn't like rolling block puzzles, but maybe that's why you were the best person to design the tutorial puzzles for that. So I was thinking that maybe you're not such a fan of puzzle games, and that's like in general, and that's the reason why you make better puzzle games than some other people.
Yeah, certainly on those puzzles in Islands of Insight, it was like I was acutely aware of the aspect of that type of puzzle that was annoying. And so the puzzles that I would design were ones that didn't fall into that annoying aspect, right? And so it was much easier for me to kind of see like, okay, how do I come up with puzzles that are actually going to get somebody from like, ugh, the feeling of like, I don't want to do this, to like, oh, actually I see how this is interesting. And so that was sort of a process, right, that took me some time, but my initial thought about the puzzles was like, this is not interesting. But at that time it was like, I think at that time the only puzzles of that type in the game were a bunch of like algorithmically generated ones. So so it wasn't that hard to do better than the algorithmically generated ones, but yeah, so I think that could be true, right? That like my frustration with puzzle games in general is directly linked to whatever perceptual ability that I have that allows me to, to do some kind of a decent job designing them. I don't know. I don't have a big ego particularly about my own puzzle design, other than like oftentimes I play other games and I get frustrated with the design and think I would have done it differently. So whether that's, I guess I have an opinion that my approach to something is better for XYZ reasons, but I think, it's a similar thing that with like John Blow and streaming games, and oftentimes people watch John play a game and they're sort of just like flabbergasted by the things that he gets stuck on, and like how does he not see that there's like yellow paint on the thing, or how does he not see that there's an icon that's telling him he needs to go this way or whatever? But I think it's kind of the same thing where it's like if you're not naturally, well, it's not even natural. It's like a learned thing. It's like a learned thing that like I just look at the icon on the screen and it tells me where to go and I don't have to think or whatever. But having like a perception that's more of like closer to if somebody had just sat down and was playing a video game and had never seen a video game before, how they would perceive the situation, I think actually helps you as a designer a lot. You know, even if the consequence of that is maybe that oftentimes you're banging your head against something that to somebody who plays a lot of video games seems really obvious.
You know, like there are people who like just solving Sudoku books or whatever, and so you're not one of those people who just like solving some not so high quality puzzles because you have too much time or whatever. So maybe like because of that you have like higher standards of for your own games, and because you're not someone who would be interested in solving a book full of Sudokus, that's why you're better at designing puzzle games than people who would be interested in doing that.
Yeah. I mean, I have literally like right here a book with some Sudokus in it.
Okay.
But this is like a very particular book of puzzles. It has a bunch of different kinds of puzzles in it, so it's not all Sudokus, but and so these are all like actually pretty good puzzles in here, and so it's
yeah,
interesting.
okay. I meant
that,
like computer generated Sudokus or whatever.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. It's there's a big difference between that and like book of randomly generated puzzles where you're kind of just doing the same puzzle over and over again. And it's true that like I don't have a ritualistic need to want to do the same kind of thing over and over again. Although recently I have been playing a lot of like Fortune's Foundation, so which is just Zachtronic's solitaire game. But I typically have not liked those kind of games either. So I don't know. I guess it has to do with like how interesting is that thing, and the average Sudoku puzzle is not that interesting. But yeah, it's not my go-to relaxation thing to be like, let's fire up the the old 1001 Sudoku puzzles book and do that as I'm going to sleep. No, I don't do that. Instead I just doom scroll Twitter.
Okay.
Much better use of my time.
When we talked about a year ago, you told me that you don't want to make puzzle games anymore because you've done that for over a decade. And at the time you worked on a story game, and you're somewhat excited about that. But then several months later you changed your mind and you were like, well, maybe I'll make another puzzle game. So
Yeah.
why did you change your mind, and how do you feel about that now?
I mean, I certainly think coming off of Taiji, like even before shipping Taiji, I had told you that I was just like so tired of just the game, like I was exhausted.
Yeah.
And so I went right from that to working on Islands of Insight, but I mostly didn't do puzzle design on that for a similar reason, which is that I was just kind of tired of thinking about those kind of puzzles. And a lot of the puzzles in Islands of Insight are at least superficially similar to Taiji puzzles in that they're like shading puzzles on a grid or whatever. And not that that game doesn't have interesting puzzles in it. It does. It's just like my excitement to design those kind of puzzles was like totally gone. And I don't really remember exactly saying that I didn't want to make a puzzle game again, but I probably expressed some frustration that somehow I always seem to find myself working on a puzzle game, that like that's that's where it always goes. And I did have, and I you know, it's still an interesting idea, but I had this idea for a story game that's like about taking a trip on a train, and ostensibly this train is a metaphor for life or whatever. And there's some interesting things about that, in that it would allow me to pursue just story, which was kind of the part of Taiji that I avoided doing. But as I was kind of working on that, I guess I just felt a sense that maybe it was not the right thing for me to do, for a few reasons. You know, the most, let's say, crass reason would be, why would anybody want to buy this game? I should probably lean into making something that obviously has some appeal to people that liked Taiji. Even if it does have a story component, it's like there should still be part of it where they're like, well, even if I don't like the story part, at least I know like this part's going to be good because I have evidence to suggest that that should be good, right? And then the secondary reason is just that like there's lots of other people that do story games, and am I contributing?
That's not many who make good story games.
Well, that's true, but I'm not. I mean, I'm not sure that I'm making a good story game, or that it even needed to be a game, right? It's like it's possible that it could just be a book. Like when I was prototyping it, I felt constantly frustrated by the fact that I felt like that there should be some choices that the player has in the story, right? Because every time I would write something, I'd be like, well, I want everybody that plays this to read this, right? Because it's good and it's part of the thing. And if I put a branch in the story, then it's like, well, you've missed this part of the story because you took the other branch, and then maybe one branch is better than the other in my estimation, and so why don't I just like cut off the bad branch and just have the good branch, and then it's not there, then you have no choice in the story whatsoever. And like, why is it a game other than like it's a presentational aspect of the story, which is maybe fine, but I felt a bit of a maybe an identity crisis about the game overall. And I also felt like I had not followed my own advice, because always my advice that I give other people is like prototype a bunch of different things and then like just go with what feels like the best thing to do, right? Because you'll naturally have a lot of options, but some options are maybe better than others. But if you don't prototype anything, then you're just like just by default working on the one thing that you started working on. So I felt like I wanted to do that, but really that didn't even come up immediately, because like the most proximal reason was that I wanted to do a follow-up on my do's and don'ts of honest puzzle game design lecture that I gave 10 years ago, and I've been wanting to do a follow-up on that for most of the past 10 years. And I started to feel like, oh, I think I might be able to do this, so I started working on that, and then that I was getting a little stymied on that, and I switched gears to the story game. And then I decided like, okay, I want to go back and finish that lecture up. And then it was like, while I was working on the lecture, I started thinking, you know, I should probably after this not go right back to the story game and instead prototype some other things. So it is true that there's a frustration that I have about constantly ending up working on puzzle games, or more particularly constantly ending up working on games that are weird and hard to design. And like, why can't I just... You know, that's like, why can't I just make a game that's like everybody else makes? Because it just looks like it would be so easy. But I guess the fact is, like, if it's easy, then I get bored or something. I really don't know.
Yeah, it's less meaningful to make a game just like everybody else's game, from like perspective of like trying to pushing the art of the game design.
Yeah, even though it can be very frustrating to be in the middle of a project where you need to solve a really difficult design problem and you have no idea how to even begin.
Yeah, you told me a bunch of times that you just have to work on something that you feel that nobody else would do other than you.
Yeah, I think it helps with the inevitable existential crises that come when you're like working on a big project and it feels hopeless or whatever. If it's something that I can't relax and say, well, you know, even if I don't do it, then somebody else will do something like this. To just be able to tell yourself, like, no, like, if I don't do this, then nobody else is going to do it. So I got to figure it out. I got to do it. And, you know, it does give some motivation in those times.
Do you regret not cutting black and white puzzles right after Taiji's release?
Oh, right. So by black and white puzzles, you mean the puzzles in Taiji that are like these stacked sculptures of these black and white blocks. And they're sort of like, there's the tutorial at the very start of the game that has these blocks. And then there's an extension of those out into the rest of the game that becomes kind of more complex or takes a different direction. And I do definitely regret not cutting them, but at the same time, I think that begs the question of like, well, why don't you remove them from the game now?
Well, now they've been like in the game for 3 years since the release, but like you knew, like right after the release, you watched a lot of people play through the game, streamers and whatnot, and you knew that those puzzles weren't working, so you could have. I think it would have been fine to cut them like 5 days after the release, and then.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't. So part of that was that it didn't seem like it was going to be immediately easy to cut them, right? I would have had to. Well, I didn't want to cut them completely because then I would have had like a space that was just an empty space where they used to be. I mean, maybe I could have just been like, okay, there's just some boulders here, but like that would have generated questions in a way that I wasn't sure how that was going to affect the game, right? Like maybe it would be worse if there was like stuff there that looked like it was part of a puzzle and it wasn't. Maybe it would have been fine. It would have been like, oh, there's mystery in the game and there's something that we'll never solve. But the reality is like I'd carved out some space for them specifically in the environment. And
I mean, you could have just like removed that space and do like in the like function that loads the save, you could have like had a little like some ifs in there so that if people like if the character if they saved when they're in this area, then it would move the character and something like that.
Yeah, I guess I didn't think about that too much, but I think generally I was just a little allergic to making what I saw as large design changes post-release, because I did make some small design changes post-release, but like there's a lot of indies that I find don't know when to stop working on the game, and so they just keep making changes after release, and that's always frustrated me as a player, because like if I had some complaint about the game and I go and I take the time to write a review and maybe I give my honest opinion about the game and it includes some complaints about the game, it's really irritating to have that review be invalidated because now they've gone back and changed it, right? And it's just strange. Like I don't really like that approach. I like the approach that like the game is what it is, and if it has flaws, then it has those flaws. You know, additionally, it was like there were a small percentage of people that really liked those puzzles and it clicked for them. Typically, they were people that were like, "Oh, we're just studying like cellular automata in my like at school, right?" And so then I played the game and I was like, "Oh, this is like it's like the game of life," and I was like, "Yeah, that's exactly what it's like." But and so the fact that some people liked it and it really clicked for them also was a good reason to not remove it, because those people would have been like, oh, I really liked that part of the game, and now it's gone, right? So
and there was an idea that you could move them to the bonus area.
Yeah, and that one would have really taken more time, right? Like deleting them would have been probably something I could have done in a week or something, but moving them to like a new area, it's like, well, I would have had to build a new area, and it's more time consuming than you would think, especially to extend the bonus area, because the bonus area like physically overlaps with the rest of the map, and so I have to make sure that it doesn't negatively affect anything in the rest of the game. Even though it would seem like it's its own area, it's like, well, the whole map is kind of active at the same time, and if I haven't built an area to like, well, you know, like I have to disable all the collision and disable all of anything there that you might interact with while you're in the bonus area, and I typically don't worry about things that it didn't overlap with, so I would have to like extend that, and it would be overlapping with more things, and so that could take a lot of time, and I would have had to like work the bugs out and like split a branch off of the game and continue to do more testing and get people look at that, and it wasn't really something I was set up for, so it could have generated a lot of bugs to do that as well. Which is just to say that it would have been more time consuming than maybe it seems like to just move those into a new area. It's like, well.
Which puzzles besides the white and black pillar ones, you wish you had cut from the game?
I don't think there's any puzzles that I would have wanted to cut other than that. Well, there is the one puzzle that's like the intro into the hidden bonus area, the diamonds puzzle there. I didn't want to cut the puzzle, but I've always thought it was a relatively weak puzzle. And it also had the like the don't draw a swastika problem. Not that the solution was a swastika, that oftentimes when people are like contemplating possible solutions to the puzzle, one of the solutions that they contemplate is a swastika. And that's not like an irredeemable problem for a puzzle to have. It's just that the puzzle's not good enough to also justify that. Like, it's another reason to maybe redesign the puzzle. But I did take a crack at redesigning it somewhat recently, and then the puzzle that I came up with was really bad because I'm just so rusty at designing Taiji puzzles that I just decided, nah, I'm not gonna keep banging on worrying about that. It's fine.
Do you regret not postponing the release of Taiji by another year and making the game even better?
Right. So, I mean, no, I don't regret that. I've mentioned before that like there were problems that I am aware of in the game that would have taken a significant amount of time, possibly another year, to rectify, but that doesn't mean that I like regret that, because I feel like it would have made the game, maybe for the people that liked the game already, you know, maybe it would have made it like a few percentage points better for them. And that's at the cost of that they would have had to wait a very long time additionally on the game. But so the things that I would have improved, well, one, I maybe didn't know without having done more testing. So I do regret slightly not having done another round of testing right before release. It was kind of like I did this round of testing. I had made a bunch of changes. I didn't do another round of testing, and I just released the game. And that was like why those black and white pillar puzzles were a problem. So I regret that. And maybe I would have realized like the issue with too many people going left at the hub, which is kind of the proximal cause of the bad first hour experience of the game, because that's where
you did realize, you did know about it before the release, because I remember shortly before the release you were doing some changes to the visuals of the hub, like very close to the circular progress tracker. You like changed the lighting there so that people would notice the stairs more.
I thought I did that after release.
After, maybe I
Yeah, I think I did it shortly after release. I just was like, I'm just going to put another tree here that's in the path. And there was only so much I could do. And it did seem to make it slightly more likely that people went another direction. But the problem is there's like that waterfall there, and the waterfall is just too tantalizing. And most people go to visit the waterfall, and they just kind of keep going that way. And then the other thing that I would have wanted to improve was the shrine area overall, because it was like one of the first areas that I did art for, and I wasn't really happy with the art. I didn't think the art was up to the standard of the rest of the game, but the problem is it was like in the center of the map, and making the art better for that area would have required me to make the area larger, and then that means that everything in the game needs to get moved because everything is connected to that area. So that was like the real reason why I would have thought it would have taken a long time, because I would have had to make changes to every single area to accommodate making that central area larger. So I guess my advice on that is like, if you're making a game that's an open world game like this, and unless you can figure out some great way that you can easily reconfigure the size of an area, and it doesn't require you to do much glue connections between the other areas. Maybe just don't make the central area the first one that you do art for. Maybe do like a proximal edge or something, because then it's much easier to clean it up. Maybe keep the center one for the last. Or you just have to be willing to spend that extra year on it.
Well, but if you like do the areas around the center first, then like that limits how large the area in the center can be.
Yeah, it's everything's connected, and it's all a mess.
Taiji was made in Unity, and currently you're prototyping new game ideas in J, which is the new programming language made by Jonathan Blow. So why did you switch to J? Is Unity bad?
So no, I don't think Unity is bad. Like especially among the box engines. Well, really, I haven't used Godot, so although I have some misgivings about Godot from just a high level technical overview. But in any case, certainly between like Unreal and Unity and let's say like Game Maker, which I have also used, I think Unity is the best box engine. Like it's a really good product, I think. My concern is that the Unity Corporation is just kind of speed running bankruptcy right now, and they don't know how to make money on their product, even though it was a very high quality product that was kind of the, let's say, the industry standard if you were an indie, right? Nevertheless, they're just bleeding money because they're so badly managed. So in the long term, the maintainability of a project made in Unity is highly in question, because if the Unity Corporation goes out of business, then who's going to be maintaining Unity? So if you have a game that stops working on like a new version of Windows, or we all switch over to Steam OS, or whatever happens in the next 10 years, right? There's a high likelihood that something will break, and you're sort of dependent on Unity to fix those kind of things, right? It's like, okay, I need to like update the game, and that means I need to go update Unity, and I need to make a new build. And it's like, well, if there's no new build of Unity, then at a certain point, like, it's unclear if people will be able to play your game. Now, there are so many Unity games that it's likely there'll be a community effort if that kind of thing happens, you know, similar to like Flash games from 15 years ago or whatever, right? Like Flash is totally defunct, but you know, now people are making like this Ruffle that's a Flash emulator, right? So anyway, you're sort of tying yourself to a sinking ship if you start a new project with Unity, because it's like, well, the writing's on the wall. I know this company is not long for this world, so they might survive long enough for me to ship the game, but like in 10 years after I release this game, especially if you're spending like, I mean, I spent, you know, the better part of a decade on Taiji. It's like, I don't want that to be a game that people can't play into the future, but it's sort of out of my hands to some extent. So the reason to switch to Jai was that, to try to like own more of my own tech. And I had previously to Unity, I had done my own game engine in C++ before, so it wasn't like I had no experience with doing lower level programming, or that it seemed like it would be impossible. It certainly limits the scope. Like it's much harder for me to do like a 3D game with high quality shaders and lighting and shadows and all that. Like that becomes rather outside of the scope of a project that I would do.
So what would you use if you had a great idea for a 3D game and you wanted to do that game?
So that's really tough. That's a really tough question, because my experience using like the Unreal Engine is the Unreal Engine is terrible from a developer standpoint. It's just horrible. It is much worse than Unity to try to use. The documentation is really bad all the time. Like people complain about Unity that like, oh, they never they never finish up their features or whatever, right? They start up some feature and then they just abandon it in like beta form or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Unreal does the same thing. They just call it production ready. They just say it's production ready and then they abandon it, even though it doesn't work. It crashes all the time, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's tough because I don't want to sign up for that kind of experience with trying to ship a game in Unreal, but at the same time, the likelihood that Unreal is still around in 20 years seems higher than Unity. So I really don't know. You know, I might, depending on the scope of the thing, actually consider Godot, because at least it's something that you have
Open source, yeah.
You have open source access to and whatever. I mean, it is true with Unreal that you do get source code access, so it's certainly still more likely that you could keep the thing working, but Unreal is just extremely complicated. I don't know. So
isn't Unity extremely complicated?
yeah, but like I feel like it's possible to ship a Unity game and not know about, I mean, it certainly was for me, not really know about the internals, about how everything works, whereas that was certainly not possible, at least on Islands of Insight, right, which was the Unreal Engine game that I worked on. Although that, you know, was very, I don't want to say like cutting edge, but, you know, we were pushing like the visual component of the game pretty hard, and so it required a lot of digging into the engine in order to try to get the game to run acceptably. So there was a lot of stuff where we literally just would have to step through the Unreal source and see what it was doing in order to find out why something was slow or whatever. And then it turns out that like, oh, actually if you tick this box in the model importer, then that doubles the amount of memory that the mesh takes, and so that's why the game's using so much memory, is just because we had that one box ticked that we didn't think mattered. You know, we didn't think that it mattered. We had the tessellation box ticked because we don't do tessellation in the game, but nevertheless it like bundles in all this tessellation information into the mesh when it's loaded into the game in runtime, and so anyway, I didn't have to worry about that stuff with Unity. Now, like I said, it could just be because the scope of the...
I remember that while you were working on the port to Switch, you sometimes complained that, oh, it's a black box.
Right.
I don't know. It's like, I don't know why is it doing that, and I can't look into the code to figure it out.
Well, that is true. You're right. Like on Switch, there were certainly things like why is the game spending all this time sorting or whatever, right? Like it's doing a bunch of sorting, and I don't understand why it's sorting because nothing's moving. So why is it sorting? But the game's slow because of sorting, and I really wish I could get some introspection into like what actually causes it to do that. Or, you know, there was just frustration in general that like if this was not Unity and it was my own code, then like this would never happen, because like the default for 90% of the things in the game would be you sort them at startup and you never touch them again, right? Because they don't do anything.
Yeah.
They just sit there.
And Unity doesn't know that, so.
And Unity doesn't know that, so I have to like try to figure out why is it sorting a thing that's not moving, right? Which I kind of figured out some of those things, right? But yeah, it was a little bit of just like trial and error and guesswork on that. So in that sense, I guess you could say Unreal's better because you can at least step through the source code and see what it's doing. So then you know, oh, okay, like there's this value that it chooses to sort based on, and I didn't realize that was a factor, so I need to go like figure out that that's not set on things. I don't know. So the answer there is that I'm just avoiding doing those kind of projects because I think there's a lot of interesting things to do without doing 3D, and there's lots of reasons to not do 3D anyway, even without it being that I would have to write a 3D renderer or something, right?
Yeah. Were there other like bad things that you run into about Unity other than? Well,
I think I made some decisions that saved me a lot of like pain points that could have happened. Which one of those was like I didn't use stuff from the asset store. for the most part. And for the most part, I also didn't use any, packages that Unity made that were not considered production. The only exception was the input system, although it was production ready by the time I shipped. But that was because the old input system was so bad that I just didn't have any choice. I needed something better. And I thought it would be better to use the Unity input system rather than to use some other asset that somebody else had made, right? I was like, I think it's better to bet on the Unity thing continuing to work than something else that the author of it could die and then it just doesn't work with the next version of Unity or something.
Where earlier you said that Unity is such a good product.
Well, no, it's just like I think that, well, there's dependency hell, right? So that's a real thing no matter what you're doing. It's like the more external things that you depend on for your product to work, the higher the risk is that any one of those things could stop working and now the game doesn't work or it's in jeopardy or I got to figure something out. So that was one of those things where I just avoided assets from the asset store, right? So if somebody might have like made a nice menu system that I could just download and I could pay them like $10 and download it and put it in the game, and that's cool, but it's like, well, if then I'm dependent on them maintaining that thing.
Well,
and
I was
keeping it
referring
working.
to this input system that was so terrible.
Oh, right. Well, the new input system was very good, right?
Okay.
It was just the old one was really bad.
Okay.
That had been around since like the very, very, very beginnings of Unity, and it just didn't support basic things that you would want, right? So like a X input gamepad, like you couldn't separate the triggers, right? So this is very in the technical weeds, but if you access like say an Xbox controller through direct input instead of the X input API, then it treats the triggers as though they're one axis, like both triggers are one axis. So if you press both triggers, you get a 0 value. And you can't tell that both triggers are pressed. So you have to use the X input. I assume they just did that because they wanted people to use the X input API. So they just made it not work with the direct input API. But anyway, you couldn't do that. I mean, you could have, like, I could have written a specific thing that would like go around their input system and access X input directly. But there were other reasons to want to have a better input API, and so I used the new one because that one was very like out of the box. It would basically support any controller that somebody would hook up, right? Whereas the built-in one, like it kind of did, but you didn't get reliable things, right? So they handled a lot, like the new input system, as they called it, right? It handled a lot of that complexity of different kinds of controllers and sort of simplified that down to like, okay, it's the bottom button on that controller, right? And so across a bunch of different controllers, they would like unify that where's the bottom button, and we'll map that they pressed this button on the controller and you can treat that as though the bottom button, right? On the like on the your face buttons, your bottom button, right? But that might be a different index of the buttons on a bunch of different controllers, right? So you just kind of had better out of the box support for things than that. I mean, I still didn't like verify that it worked across a bunch of different controllers, but it's probably more likely than not if you just have a random controller lying around and you turn it on and you play Taiji that it will work as basically you would expect.
Well, I think if you just get the information from the X input API, it will always match the buttons correctly. At least I haven't run into a situation which.
Yeah, but the input system in Unity also supports non-X input controllers. So.
Okay. Some time ago, you said that some players complained that the bonus puzzles don't give them any reward, except opening a shortcut, which is usually not that useful. But sometimes it doesn't even open a shortcut. And you said that maybe you should have added some kind of collectible that player would get for solving those optional areas. And sometimes something would be unlocked if you gather enough collectibles. Shouldn't puzzles themselves be enough of a reward?
So the motivation for not having collectibles, even though it was something I had thought about while I was working on the game, was exactly that I was like, well, I don't want players to be thinking about getting collectibles. I wanted them to just be thinking about doing puzzles, right? And that's like the value of the game. And I do think the game's fine, even though there are these dead ends. But the problem that I realized later is the that players don't realize that they're working towards a dead end, right? And really you want players to like know that they're working towards a dead end, and so then they're actually making a conscious decision of whether they just want to pursue doing these puzzles because they're interesting or not. But generally speaking, in Taiji, you just don't know. You just get to the end of the section and it does nothing, and that's sort of a unsatisfactory feeling.
Yeah, if you didn't have this goal that the game can't have any words, then you could have just put a sign there that says bonus puzzles or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's something. Well, even if they had all done nothing, it probably would have been better, because the thing is some of them give you a shortcut, right? And so there's not even a consistent pattern in the game that they do nothing. Like if they always did nothing, then I think people would pick up on that after they'd done a few of those side areas. They're like, oh, it doesn't do anything. So the next time they see one of those, maybe they kind of think that. But it's hard to say because it is a subtle pattern. You just kind of have to pick up on it. Like yesterday I was playing this game, Ooh. It's like that's like a puzzle platformer that's where you blow up bombs or whatever, and you can't jump. You just have to use the bombs to jump and whatever.
Did it release already?
Okay.
Yeah,
it's a cool game actually. The final game is much better than the demo. I didn't like the demo very much, but the final game is.
Did they implement your suggestions?
They didn't implement my suggestion, but they did make it to where like the bomb that's going to blow up is a different color than the other bombs. So you can tell when you hit the button which bomb is going to blow up, which is much better than it was before. Also the problem with the demo was like primarily a pacing problem, and I think it was because they wanted to give you a bit of a whirlwind tour of what the game was like. But it ended up being like you are doing too many puzzles that are about the order in which you place the bombs, and you don't get enough practice with the ideas in the game. Whereas in the final game, it kind of sets things up more to where you can kind of chunk the ideas. And so it becomes like a move that's in your toolbox of like, oh, right, I know how to do this in this kind of situation. And so it's just much less confusing in the final game. But anyway, the thing I wanted to say is there's a structural thing in the game, which I guess this is minor spoilers for this game, but there's a structural thing in the game where you come to like a branch point, and if you go one way, it's kind of a knowledge gate. And if you go the other way, you do some puzzles, and then you learn the thing that you need to do to go back to get through the knowledge gate. But this was totally unobvious to me because the game doesn't tell you anything about this. You just like go down a branch and it dead ends, and then you're like, okay, I guess I got to warp somewhere. I'm not sure where I'm supposed to warp. But my point is if you don't know about like the structure, then it doesn't necessarily matter that the structure makes sense, because the player has to like figure that out. And I think after you would do enough of these things in the game, like the third time, maybe you would start to realize that that's the structure of the game, right? And that every time I come to a dead end, I'm supposed to go back to the point where the path had split and go the other way, because now I know how to do the thing, right? But I didn't know, and the only reason I knew was because somebody in chat spoiled it. But anyway, that was just my point, was like, it's a similar thing where if I had been very consistent about how all those worked, then I think everybody would have been able to pick up on that the extra little areas. Eventually, they would have picked up on that, oh, I maybe I shouldn't do this because it's not going to lead to anything. But the fact is some of them do lead to something kind of useful, and some of them lead to a shortcut that's not very useful, and some of them do nothing at all. So,
yeah.
To come back to the collectibles question, though. So after the fact, and after release, I started thinking, like, of all of the maybe not so great options that I had, because I don't think I could have come up with a way to always have a useful shortcut for every single one of these side areas, because the geography of the game didn't necessarily allow that.
No, another way to solve that problem would be to introduce some visual element that would sort of that people could easily pick up on.
Well, I thought I
with-
did, in that I made all the wires in those areas like red.
Well, but that's very subtle.
Well, that's rule of subtlety, right? Where the like if you think something's obvious as a designer, then players find it subtle. So
I was thinking like, I don't know, you could have put like red plants or something. I don't know if red would be good color.
right.
No.
Yeah, there could have been some way to do it, but I thought after release that among all the maybe not ideal options, that the collectible thing wasn't so bad. But the collectible thing was not just like having collectibles on those paths. It was just like the entire core progression of the game would have been built around collectibles instead of built around getting these little lamps lit, right? Which I mean is in a way kind of a collectible, but it would have just been like there's a thing that you get if you finish the area, and you also get like
like the jigsaw pieces in Braid.
yeah. So it'd just be like a thing, except you wouldn't have to get all of them, right? In Braid, you have to get all of them, so that's a big difference. So it would have been possible for you to do these optional side paths, and maybe you could get enough collectibles to like get to the end of the game, even if you hadn't done the like mainline path. So then those paths would have been just as valid for like trying to complete the game as the main one, right? So I think that could have been a good structural thing to do. In retrospect, I don't think it would have hurt the game that much that like, oh, I got a little emerald or something at the end of the area, and then if I go back to the hub, there's a thing that's like wanting me to have, I don't know, 15 of these emeralds or whatever it would be, right? It would have been a way to like more granularize the progression in the game, and that might have actually been better for the game overall. Even though my initial like ick factor about the idea of like giving the player a little trinket. So, but I don't think it doesn't hurt Braid that much that you get puzzle pieces. Like nobody's thinking like, oh, the game is so much worse because I picked up a shiny puzzle piece, and like that lessened the value of the puzzle. Like, yeah, I mean it feels pretty good when you get the thing, but it's just a symbolic thing that you've finished something.
But in Braid there are more reasons for getting those jigsaw pieces.
That's true. Because it is like, that is the puzzle, is like, how do I get to where that thing is, right?
Yeah. And also you have. I mean, maybe I shouldn't spoil Braid for people who haven't played it. There is this puzzle in which like,
oh right,
what is on the jigsaw, or two puzzles like that. What is on the jigsaws like matters is like part of the puzzle, and you also like the jigsaw puzzles that you assemble are part of the story. So you sort of, it's like a symbolic thing.
Yeah, well, there's no reason
there's
no reason in Taiji that I couldn't have gone down that route with collectibles also, right? They could have been more deeply integrated into the rest of the game in some way and been part of their own like meta puzzle or something, right?
Yeah, or story.
I mean, to some extent, I already have that a little bit in the final game in the map, right? Because the map pieces are sort of collectibles that you get, and the reason that that's good is because it's tied in several different ways. So.
Are there things in Taiji that players unfamiliar with The Witness struggle with, but those who have played The Witness don't?
Well, the one thing that I definitely knew, or I didn't know until after release, because so many of the playtesters were people who were fans of The Witness, was the concept of the error flashing on puzzles, right? That like symbols that are unsatisfied flash red when you try to submit the solution to the puzzle. That was something that basically everybody who played the game pre-release understood because they played The Witness, but I didn't think about as something that like, oh, I should try to make sure that you can figure that out when you run into that first in the game, right? So in The Witness, like it's very carefully set up so that you will typically run into one of two sets of puzzles initially that would have that kind of feature, whereas in Taiji it's like the entire tutorial doesn't have that feature at all, right? So I sort of just let you loose in the open world, and you could run into any puzzle in the game that might show you that, and so it's not a very curated experience as far as that goes. But I don't know what I would have done in that regard.
So
in
why
Taiji,
didn't you
but
copy the witness in terms of that? Why didn't you make it?
I just perceptually didn't realize that that was a thing that somebody would need to learn to understand, right? Because I didn't have any testers that were confused by it.
Oh yeah, but like, I'm asking like more general question, like before you talked about that people have bad time if they go west after leaving the tutorial area than the people who go right,
Right.
or north.
I think well, when I was laying out the world, I probably had a little bit of a naive idea at that time, which was that like it's just good for the player to have a lot of options, right? Once they get into the world, like I want them to feel like I can go anywhere and do whatever. And so it wasn't until much later that I realized that is a bit of a naive idea, right? Like it is good, but like the player wants to feel pretty directed towards like the best place for them to go, at least for until they understand like something about the overall structure of the game, right? So yeah, now I would be like, oh, let's really try to like funnel you towards like the dice pips area or something, right? Because that would be a really good area to start with, and then I can kind of like control that and control like what your experience is for longer. But I think I kind of thought like, no, I want to get you out of the tutorial and into the quote unquote real game, and the real game is like open and you can go wherever. And that sort of was at the expense of the player experience to some extent, because I was abdicating too much control over that. Like I should allow you to go wherever, but it should be pretty obvious that like, yeah, maybe I should go here, right? Like you should sort of be subconsciously led towards where I want you to go. And then there's like a small group of rebels that are running off into the woods, and I just want to go through these trees over here and see what's over there, right? Like I should have had something like that where there's like a dense row of trees and you just have to like go through that if you wanted to go somewhere else, right? It would be a really clear sign that like, okay, this is the beaten path and I could go this way, and that's probably a good experience. But I have, like the Witness does that where it gives you a few options, right? But they're all pretty much equally valid, right? Of what you might want to do at the beginning, right? Like you might be tempted to go over and do the orchard tree puzzles in the Witness, right? Rather than go do the symmetry area. But it's pretty clear like where you're supposed to go. You just follow the path.
Do you think the game could be better if you got more playtesters who didn't play the Witness?
Yeah, it was just hard to find those testers, right? Because mostly I relied on people that just reached out to me that wanted to play test the game. I would say like, hey, I'm looking for playtesters, and some people would reach out. But generally, if people were even interested in the game enough to look that far into it, they were already fans of The Witness. So I honestly I'm not sure, but I don't think I had any playtesters who had not played The Witness at all. Now it was okay because my primary audience for the game was like people that enjoyed The Witness, and so appealing to them and making sure that the game was a satisfying experience for them was like kind of the most important thing. I didn't want people to come to the game thinking like, oh, it's kind of like The Witness, and then be really disappointed, right? Like they needed to really be satisfied with the game, and then it was secondary. Like if people...
Although there were people like that, most of them were the people who went to the West after leaving the tutorial area, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure how much like people who are unsatisfied correlates with people who had played The Witness, but it's certainly true that there are negative Steam reviews of the game that compare it disfavorably to The Witness and say things like it doesn't make any sense and you have to read the designer's mind. And I don't always know what their experience was like, right? But I often assume that their experience was probably something like that. But there's some people who play much further in the game and still think that. I really don't. I'm not sure why, but I mean, there are some things in the game where I could understand why people might feel that way, because I had a very like a fundamental drive with everything in the game to always like push the logic. Like if it was an area that was like about reading the environment, I always wanted to push the logic to where it started to kind of come apart a little bit, and then stop at that edge, right? And so for some people, like they get annoyed at that part of those areas where they like get to like the final puzzle and they're like, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah, like the final puzzle in the ruins or graveyard, right?
Yeah. Whereas other people think like that those make perfect sense. So you know, and obviously I think they make sense.
Johnst asks, what was the art process like? What tools did you use to paint the world? I'm assuming the world isn't one giant PNG, so how were the assets assembled, ensuring pixel alignment, visual consistency, etc.?
Yeah, well, it's definitely not just one giant PNG, although there are some very large PNGs. Well, I did most of the art in a sprite. Which is like just a pixel art focused art tool. Also does animation stuff, so it's very useful for that. And some stuff was done in Photoshop because it was just easier to do that there. Like the interior lighting for a lot of areas required these sort of soft fall offs and blends of different things, and so I tended to do those in Photoshop instead. But there's probably some video devlogs where I talk about the process of doing that.
I remember one in which you talk specifically about rocks, so you could maybe link that devlog in the description.
Yeah, but generally speaking, what I had in the game was like I just snapped everything to a grid, so that kept everything like pixel aligned. Now you did have to. That also meant that all of the images needed to be like a correct multiples of 2 or something size to work. There was something about the size of the images that always had to be correct, or maybe it was like the sort point. I think that was the thing that got screwed up the most. Was like in the technical details again. That like in Unity you have like an origin point for the sprite, and you need to make sure that's aligned, regardless of like the size of the sprite. So sometimes like it would pick a center point, and then that center point is like not a good point, because it's not aligned to the pixel grid. And so that would throw off the snapping, because even though you're snapping the object's position to the pixel grid, like it's halfway in between 2 pixels in the image. So that's generally how I did that, but it was just kind of kit bashed together from a bunch of different things. It's true that like rocks was, I drew so many rocks like bespokely for different areas in the game that it became kind of a running joke on my on my live streams when I was working on the game, that if I was but wasn't sure what to do, or I wanted to procrastinate, then I would just draw rocks.
Yeah.
And that was meant to be like, the rocks were meant to be all kit bash rocks, but it just often was the case that there was like some rock formation that I wanted to make and it just didn't look very good, so I would go in and just make some custom thing for that. But
did you implement some shader to make the pixel art look good when you move in the world?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not a great setup in the game, but there's essentially like a 2-stage process where I like render the game aligned to the pixel grid into a buffer, and then there's like a second pass where that gets fed into a shader that then does the like sub-pixel offset. So that took a lot of time to like iron out, because I barely knew what I was doing. But essentially there's like a filter in the game that only will like blur the edges between pixels if it's like on the edge of the square of the pixel art, right? So because otherwise, like if you just filtered stuff, it would be blurry, right? And so it just does some like math to figure out exactly where those edges are, and then does the blend on that exact screen pixel. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's in the, again, in the technical weeds that, yeah, there is definitely a shader to make that look smooth and let the game zoom in and out smoothly, because I don't like when other pixel art games like just use a nearest neighbor filter and everything gets kind of weird when it zooms in and out or moves. And you can kind of do something like I think Hyperlight Drifter was sort of known for doing this, where you can just snap everything to screen pixels rather than so you can just do an interval where the camera's only allowed to move from one point where it's sharp to the next screen pixel where it would still be sharp, so that the world pixels are always aligned. But that still doesn't let you zoom in and out. So
yeah, if someone who's watching it is making a pixel art game, then maybe you should check out Casey Muratori had a video about it in Handmade Hero. I don't remember what it was called. Handmade Hero discussion or something like that.
Yeah, that was where I had first heard about that concept, and it took me way too long to figure out how to do it correctly. But there's probably also, I have a devlog on the Taiji website, because there's a written devlog and there's a video devlog, and oftentimes people only know about one or the other. I guess it's more often now that people don't know about the written one, but so there's probably some stuff in there where I talk about how I do that as well.
Certainly also can find some tutorials for Unity for doing that kind of thing. Anyway,
oh yeah, it's true. Like Unity has, this is again in the weeds, but Unity does have this like built-in thing now that they call Pixel Perfect Camera, which does the thing that I said, where it just snaps to screen pixels rather than doing any kind of blending. But that isn't going to help you with zooming, so it's a little unideal, but it's better than the alternatives.
yeah, Casual Joe asks, were all of the areas fully sketched out and then refined, like with Mill's concept art? Or were there areas where you finished the art and in sections and then combined?
Well, definitely not all the areas were fully sketched out. Like the mill. So as things went on, it became like a little bit more refined of a process, and I figured out how I wanted to do things. But really, the only areas that were fully sketched out were the mine and the mill, I think. Well, no, the bonus area and the in-game area were also, I think, mostly sketched out. But the first few areas that I didn't really do that way. I kind of, over time, that's part of why like the shrine is not so good, is because I kind of took the prototype layout and I just sort of drew over that and just assumed that I would want the same layout for the art as I had for the prototype version. But you often want different things between those versions. And so over time, it became like more clear that I needed to do a pass where I would sketch everything out and figure out what I wanted the area to look like with the art, so that I could make adjustments there as needed, and it would be relatively painless before I implemented it. Because once you implement it, it's like so technically involved that you have all these different pieces and stuff. If you just want to like move something, it's very hard. And so the answer is what I said. No, not all of them were like that, but towards the end they became more like that. Like Mill and the mine were both ones where I sketched out pretty detailed what they were going to look like before I built them, and then I just built them exactly the way that the sketch was. I mean, there were some changes that had to get made later, but that's always how it is, right?
By the way, this video by Casey Muratori, it's called Handmade Hero Chat 18 Pixel Art Games and Side Shader Analysis.
Okay, cool.
Okay, what was the biggest technical challenge in the development of Taiji?
I think that my go-to answer here is always the sort of abortive attempt at the in-game puzzles, right? So like the first version of that, I wanted to do this idea where there would sort of be symbols that weren't on the panel, and the game would decide based on the pattern that you had input onto the panel whether or not it was possible for that panel to be any configuration of the symbols as a solvable puzzle. So it would place down symbols on the puzzle to make the puzzle solvable, right? Or make it work, and it would just check that, and if what you had drawn didn't work, then you would fail the puzzle. So it was meant to be kind of like a meta understanding of like the kinds of things that would make valid puzzles or not. Except naturally, it was very, very difficult to get the computer to do that kind of thing in a timely fashion. It was very slow to like go through all these possibilities of things you could do and make sure that the puzzle would work or didn't work with any of them. And it wasn't clear whether or not it was going to make interesting puzzles. But I spent probably like, I don't know, probably like 4 or 5 months on that, on just like optimizing that and trying to get it fast enough to where it would even be viable, to check a puzzle that was more than like, you know, a 4x4 grid or something. And so I don't know why, but like at a certain point, I just decided, even though I was like almost done with that technical problem, I just decided that this was probably the wrong approach. I can't remember who, but I think I talked to somebody about it. I was just like asking them, like, does this even seem like it's solvable or a good idea or whatever? And I remember them kind of questioning whether or not it was going to actually be an interesting series of puzzles. And I think I had lost track of that because I had become so like mired in the trenches of trying to fix the technical problems and make it work fast enough that when I thought about like, yeah, I don't really know whether it will be interesting. And I've spent a long time on this.
Didn't you design some puzzles on paper before you started to programming the system?
No, not really. I just built the thing out because I thought like maybe it'll be interesting, and I just kind of got lost in the technical challenge of making that work and forgot about whether it would be interesting or not. And I still don't really know. I think probably not. But ultimately what I did, right, was pivot, and I instead decided that it should be the other way around, where you as the player are figuring out where the symbols go in the puzzle, right? And that would be maybe more interesting, which even that was like not inherently that interesting, and I had to come up with another idea to make it more interesting. But so that was probably the hardest technical challenge, but it was like a dead end. And then the next hardest thing was just getting the game to run at 60 FPS on Switch. Because that took like, I don't know, better part of 9 months or something.
The Johnny Mister asks, what inspired the character design?
So I this is another thing where there's like a video devlog that sort of ostensibly answers some of this, but now it's been like several years since release, so maybe I can talk a little bit more about the other part of it. So at that time I was like, well, originally I made the character like all white because then she would be very visible on the screen at all times, and so that was a good idea for that. But then people were saying that the character looked like the PC Master Race meme, and so I couldn't really get away from that it did look like that. So I thought, well, okay, I'll change the color of the character to be black instead of white. But in the long run, you know, I ended up sticking with that because there's sort of there's the dualistic kind of theme of the game, and you've got your sort of two characters, which is like the princess or the girl that you run around as, and then there's the fairy. And so the fairy is not exactly white, but the fairy is sort of a bright thing, and then the girl is black, so it represents that duality of that. And so I guess that's the main reason for the character design being the way that it is. Also, she's female because that's sort of in that aspect of duality, is the feminine, and the fairy is male, although most of the written story of the game got cut, so you would never really know that from playing the final game.
Yeah, and obviously white is associated with and the brightness with masculinity and you know, like symbolically, and the chaos and dark colors are associated with femininity. So yeah.
Yeah, so those are the kind of thematic reasons why it felt right to stick with that, right? Even though like some of getting there was really more, again, like I said before, sometimes you have like naive reasons for doing things, and it's not a bad reason to be like, oh, I'll make her bright white so that she stands out on the screen, but in the long run,
yeah, but it's more important for the fairy to stand out on the screen because it's smaller.
True. Well, and it had that benefit too, right? That the fairy, which really I only implemented the fairy like orbiting around your character and following your character because I wanted to have this world space mouse cursor thing, because I wanted to be able to move the camera and I didn't want the camera to fight you when you were aiming at puzzles. And then that created a problem that the cursor needed to move with you, your character, in world space to the next puzzle. So I was like, okay, well, the character will kind of orbit around you like in Ocarina of Time, like Navi, the fairy orbits around you in that. But that actually worked out too, because then you have this little white fairy that is showing you where your character is at all times. So when you're running around, right?
Were other grid shapes ever considered?
Yeah, well, actually, in the game, it's implemented the ability to at least do like multi tiles, right? So you have like 2 tiles that are connected together, or you can do 3 tiles, or any kind of arbitrary shape that way that's on the grid. But I didn't ship that because some of the ways in which I had thought about implementing that mechanic never, like, they didn't generate interesting puzzles. There's like other ways to think about it that would have been more interesting, but I didn't come up with those in the process, and I had already decided pretty much what was going to be in the game at that point, that I realized that maybe it could have been interesting. As far as like other grids, like triangular grids or hex grids or whatever, I certainly thought about those things too, but there is sort of, you have to, at a certain point, you have to decide like what's the boundary of stuff that you're going to cover in the game. And it seemed like that was really pushing out the scope too much to be like, let's do it. Because to explore those things satisfactorily, I'd have to have another whole set of every single kind of puzzle in the game that interacts with that. And the game was kind of big enough with just what it had, without being like, now there's triangle grids doing everything. And I also, although I didn't implement it, I wasn't certain that it would be different enough to justify that much extra stuff.
Are there any rule or mechanic ideas that were suggested, occurred to you, that were rejected for purely narrative or thematic reasons?
So not for narrative or thematic reasons. I don't think there were anything that I ever like removed or rejected for that reason. I usually would reject things because it wasn't as interesting as the other things in the game, or it didn't seem like there was going to be, like, it was either going to be possible for me to teach the player the thing non-verbally, or that it was going to be an interesting experience even if I could, right? Because like a lot of the, maybe, well, I don't know, at least half of the game is like trying to figure out what you're supposed to do, or figure out like what the symbols on the puzzle want. And if there's not like an interesting experience as you're figuring that out, and instead it's just like the equivalent of me just telling you what it is, then maybe it's not worth it either. Or, you know, just the things, or just I cut something because it doesn't interact very well with the other things that were already in the game because it like has too much overlap. But there are a lot of like ideas that I had. I think in the like preparation for the podcast yesterday, I had mentioned one that was kind of interesting, which was sort of like you'd have 2 symbols and that would delineate like a rectangle, and you were supposed to like draw a rectangle with that. But the problem with that is like that just doesn't interact with anything else in the game very well, because it wants too much on its own. Like if I'm gonna then say, oh, there's like a dice pip in here or something, it's like, well, it can't really interact with the rectangle, or it would make the rectangle like not a rectangle anymore. So there were just some ideas that were like that.
Yeah, so like most of the areas have like clear connection to the dualistic theme of the game, but some of them have less clear of a connection, like mill and gardens. So
Is that true? I don't know. I haven't thought about it that much.
well, we can go through all of the areas and think about it if you want. I mean, Shrine has like a more subtle connection. I mean, at the beginning, when there is just one dot, it's like seems more connected, but then when you get more numbers, it's like much less connected, because you have like a lot of different numbers, not just 0 and 1 or something. But then like when you later you introduce the subtractive dots, so then like if you look at the whole area, here you have like additive dots and subtractive dots, then that fits into the dualistic theme. Obviously the non logic symbol areas, like orchard and ruins, have strong dualistic or graveyard, strong dualistic themes. And obviously mine is about connecting to things, so it's like two things, but gardens and mill are the ones. So you didn't think about this at all?
Well, you know, my approach was like mostly that I thought about the dualistic thing in that none of the symbols would be prescriptive about that aspect, although that's something I guess we'll get into a little bit earlier.
What do you mean?
Well, that it's just like none of the symbols care, like they're all symmetrical with regards to whether the area that they're in or whatever is lit or unlit, right? I mean, there's locked tiles that enforce a specific like polarity or whatever, but generally that was what I thought about it, right? So there is like, to me, in the gardens, there's the dualism of the symbol in that like it just is like things that are the same and things that are different, right? And so it's like about separating those two things, but it is also symmetrical as to which color that is. So it's true that there is no like, I mean, there's no negative version of that mechanic, but that's because it's sort of like built in, right? That it's both a negative and a positive enforcer. The mill, though, I mean, I guess I can see that, right? Like that, you know, it's if there's more than like one copy of the thing, maybe it's not really a dualistic thing. But I guess I can't say that I thought so much about trying to enforce a dualistic theme with the symbols. It was more just about like what was going to interact well with all the other things in the game and generate a lot of like depth and interest, right? The dualism thing was just inherent in the puzzles that like you could toggle on and off the tiles, so you're always like trying to find like, I kind of thought of it as like you're trying to find the balance of the opposites, and that's just what you're doing in the puzzles, right? And maybe it's a bit glib, right? But the subject matter of the game is like what's in the game, and you know, the theming that I put on top of it is like stuff that the game made me think about, or you know, an interpretive layer, I guess, on top of that, right? So it's dualistic because you have these puzzles that you can toggle on and off, and at least I'm not fighting that because I don't have mechanics in the game that are like caring a lot about whether things are lit or not specifically, right? Like they're very agnostic to that. So
the Johnny Mister asks, were there any ideas for the puzzle controls a platform type puzzles that you thought of but couldn't include?
Oh, right.
Wish you could come up with an idea for. The amount you managed is impressive, to be honest.
Right. So that means like the navigation meta puzzles that are in each of the 4 symbol areas. So there's puzzles there where you solve the puzzle and it makes a bridge or whatever. So yeah, there was definitely a couple ideas there that I didn't figure out a way to make work, and one of those was, you know, the one in the mill involves like rotating shapes around because that's the mechanic there that it uses, allows you to rotate a shape. But I always thought it would be interesting to have had one where you were like translating shapes around, but it kind of just didn't work with the mechanics that were there. I couldn't think of a way to make it work. Maybe there could have been something a little kludgy that was like, well, it's like whether you've lit the thing or not, and I could have come up with some puzzle that was symmetrically solvable about whether this shape was lit or this shape was lit, but it just wasn't really clear to me how that was going to work or be clear to the player, and maybe it would be too contrived. And then the other big one was that, and this was partly because a lot of people, when they got to the end game area, felt like it should have had more. So I had an idea for the end game area that there would be like a navigation meta puzzle there that would then use the placing the symbols on the grid mechanic and all the different types of symbols together in one big puzzle. And there were some ideas there that seemed interesting. I had an idea that was like, well, each symbol, so if you have like a diamond or something and you place that on the grid, then that's going to like move an island that's the diamond island to a certain spot on the grid. And then if you went to that island, then there would be like a puzzle there that would then like let you do something specific related to the diamonds. But it wasn't really clear to me how that was going to come together. And that sort of conflicted with the overall design of the in-game area, where I wanted to be really focused on the kind of like tree of life thing there at the end. So it just really wasn't clear like how that was going to work without it being like, oh, there's a big gap between the start of the area and then the tree, and so you see the tree for 10 seconds before you finish the area or something, which really wasn't what I wanted.
Jack Deck asks, the puzzles just before the black ending of the game, in which you have to place the elements that satisfy the solution, were quite neat, but my guess is that there aren't many more because of the inductive versus deductive puzzle design. Is that correct?
Right. Well, when we were going over these questions yesterday, I didn't really know what this one meant.
Yeah.
Maybe we left it in because it stirs some interesting discussion, but I don't really know what inductive versus deductive in the context of this really means. Typically, inductive versus deductive is like reasoning. So inductive reasoning is like the puzzles that you're doing in the game where you don't really know what the rules are and you're trying to figure it out from like some examples that you have. Versus deductive reasoning, where, in the purest sense, that's something more like Sudoku or like Islands of Insight puzzles, where you're given a list of rules. And then you just have to like follow the rules to their logical conclusion to solve the puzzle. I don't really know what that has to do with the end game puzzles here, but generally speaking, the reason that there weren't more was because I didn't really have any other ideas of what to do with them. Like I could have done, like I said, I thought about this navigation meta puzzle, and if I'd had really a killer idea for it, maybe I would have figured out the situation with the tree because it would have been worth it, but I never did. But I certainly didn't think that like doing another big puzzle where you had to like satisfy 3 different grids at the same time that just happened to use all of the different symbol types in one puzzle or something, like, which is really the only thing I could think that maybe I would do. I didn't think that would be worth doing. So that's the reason there were more, is like it just, that was about the limit of what I could see that was interesting there. Like I get that. I mean, this is why I had considered the navigation puzzle there to begin with, is like a lot of people get to that area and they felt like, oh, it feels like it doesn't go as far as they thought maybe it would, or there's like something there that isn't there. So, and there probably is. I probably missed something, but I really don't know.
Isley asks, how did you think of the super big twist of the Witness influenced, or maybe not, the types of twists you imagined in this game, and also future games of the genre?
So it was certainly something that was in the back of my mind, that like the Witness has this kind of like whole layer 2 aspect to the game where it's, there's sort of a whole game hidden inside of the game that you think that you're fixing to start playing. Because I'm making this game that's ostensibly like The Witness, and if it doesn't have something of a similar type, then I knew it would be a disappointing game for people that were coming from The Witness. So that definitely influenced me, and I think that if you're making a game that's like The Witness, you probably need to have big secrets. Ideally, like big hidden in plain sight secrets where the player doesn't necessarily know what they're even looking at when they first see it. Whatever, things that can't be unseen, whatever. These are just things that people are like looking for in that type of game. But it was actually like a long time before I figured out what I wanted to do with that. I think there's like a question later that's of this variety, so maybe it makes sense to like to rope that in here. But you know, in an early version of the game, like I really didn't know what that would be. I had lots of ideas. You know, I considered the very obvious ones. This is, you know, somewhat Witness spoilers, but I considered the very obvious ones of like, oh, there's like actually puzzles that are in the environment and you can click on them or whatever. But that never was a really satisfying solution to that design question because it was too obvious. It was too like somebody who comes into this game, they don't want literally the same thing. They want the same kind of surprise. They want something that they don't know what it means. And so eventually what I came on, I think satisfies that and satisfies something that certainly when I was playing The Witness, I thought maybe it was going to go in that direction at some point, and it never did. You know, it was never really like real puzzles in that category, right? So, so I think it's sort of, it fit in okay. But honestly, like where that came from was kind of weird and random because one of those things was like I was building out an early version of the orchard area and doing art for it. So this is spoilers, I guess, for this late part of Taiji, but I assume if you've made it this far in this video, maybe you've played Taiji already. But when I was drawing out the paths for that area, I think there was just like something I drew that like kind of looked like a tree or whatever, and my girlfriend at the time was like, oh, this looks kind of like the tree branches or whatever, so maybe you should like make it look more like a tree. And I thought, oh, that's really a cool idea, and so I just made that look more like a tree, the paths in the orchard area. But this was like an earlier version of that, and it really, when I decided that the area was needed to be like redesigned and made the structure make a little more sense, that was part of that initial conception for that area, was like, oh, I'm going to take this little idea here that I had and like enhance it. And instead of it just being in that version, it was just like part of the area, because the area had like a section here and then there was like another section over here, so it was like kind of disconnected and weird. Instead it was like, now it's going to be the whole area that's like that. But it was always at that point just supposed to be like a thing that you might notice about the game. It was not even meant to be part of a puzzle or anything. It was just like, here's a thing that you might notice, and that would be cool, right? And then later on I got the idea to like, you know, maybe I should make this an actual puzzle somehow, right? And I wasn't sure what that was going to be for the longest time. You know, I had this idea for a while that like maybe you would start the game and there's like some menu thing where you have a notebook, right? And there's just an empty notebook with empty puzzles in it, and you can flip through the notebook and you don't know what the puzzles mean, but you just have these empty puzzles. And so I that was like one of the ideas, but I never liked that because I was like, well, it's kind of abstracted out of the game and it's a weird element because there's not any other reason for you to like look at a notebook or something, right? You could imagine if there was a game where I was looking at a notebook for some other reasons and then, well, there's this weird stuff in the back of the notebook, why is that there? Then it would fit really naturally to do it that way. But anyway, so I started thinking like maybe those should be actually part of puzzles, and it just took a long time to kind of figure out what was the way in which the puzzles were actually going to be implemented into the game. And so once I realized like, oh, okay, they're going to be at the start and there's actually this way that I can do this, because that kind of came naturally, right? I just already had like these sort of Tetris block shaped things at the start and you had to draw them and whatever. but I had not really leaned into enhancing that. It was just sort of like, oh, like this island's shaped like a Tetris block. That's kind of cute or whatever. But it's not even the Tetris block that like you're drawing. But so that seems kind of silly. And so then I went and like changed them all to be the Tetris blocks that you were drawing, because that seemed like another cute thing to notice. And then it was like later that I realized, well, what if the first one is actually still not the Tetris block you're drawing? And that's a thing for you to notice too, right? And then that like unlocks the whole idea of having something hidden at the start of the game. So once I had that, then it was like, oh, okay, like I need to make these into actual puzzles. And I started looking at the areas. And this is like one of the more unbelievable things in the game, but like it just so happened that the ruins area already made a puzzle that fit thematically in with it, and I didn't have to do anything. Like that was just luck, that like the way I had designed the area, it was like a long corridor, and so I was like, oh, okay. And there were like bigger and smaller rooms because I just wanted it to have some variety in the area. But it was like never intended to even mirror the mechanic of the area. It was just like a thing there. So then the process was just, okay, well, I'll look at the other areas, and if there's something that feels really natural or obvious that I could do there, then I'll do that, right? So the graveyard area already had like some gravestones in there, and I thought, well, I can just change these gravestones and make this into like a puzzle. So I did that. And that was kind of the approach for most of the areas. But there were a few areas that I didn't have. It didn't seem like there was an obvious fit to do a puzzle there. And so for the longest time, I think there were like 6 or something. There were just like 6 of these puzzles, and there weren't actually enough puzzles to have one for every single area. And so it was later on that I made the decision to just try to do one for every single area, because it seemed like it would be best to have one for each area rather than only having 6, and it just feeling weird that there's less than there are for each area. So
while developing Taiji, did you think I can't have any rules in the game that are very similar to the ones in The Witness?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think for a while that was like a fear, right? I was like, I need to try to do things that are not similar to The Witness. And so oftentimes I would like pursue things with a very, I guess I would say like more of an open-ended approach, right? So I would try to explore things about the puzzles that could potentially be like symbols. I did decide early on that I was just going to copy this concept of having symbols embedded in the puzzle, because it just seemed like such a good idea that generated so many like rich possibilities that it was really worth the downside of that. Somebody might be like, well, this is really just kind of a ripoff of The Witness, isn't it? So I was exploring those things in a very open-ended way. So, you know, one of the things that you might care about on there is like the connectedness between points on the grid. And so eventually I was kind of agnostic about like, okay, how is that going to work, right? Is it going to work like there's only one symbol in that area, or is it going to work like there's 2 or 3, or is it going to be a symbol that like could say how many it is? And so I explored a few of those things, and it's just the case that like 2 gets you 90% of what's interesting there, and like there's maybe some stuff with 3 that you don't get with 2, but you get most of it with 2. 1 is not very interesting at all. So I just ended up with the same thing. And so at that point, it's like I already had the same thing, just because like exploring that category naturally led to the same basic idea, that I would kind of decided to like lean into, like steer into the skid that's already happening, and just the like, let's just make the whole thing be like that, right? Because the rest of those ideas are kind of natural consequences of how to make that interesting and make it interact with the other things in the game. So, and then it'll just be maybe a fun thing for people to notice that like it's the same thing, but it feels different, right? Because I felt like it felt different. If it didn't feel different, then I wouldn't have kept it in the game, right? It was like the context of the way in which you did puzzles in Taiji was different enough that it just felt like a different thing. Like sometimes people play the game and they don't even realize that it is the same thing as the like stars in The Witness. There's somebody who's listening to this right now who's just now realized that. Yeah, so I that probably answers that question well enough. And our podcast is rapidly becoming very long. I knew that it would, but
Yeah. Anyway, now there will be a part in which Matthew will show an old build, um, an old build of Taiji, obviously.
All right, so the time has come. The next hour and 20 minutes or so of the podcast are pretty much a video only segment. So this would be your cue if you've been listening audio only to maybe switch and watch the video. Or if you'd like to keep listening audio only, then you can either just bear with the misunderstandings or you can skip ahead to the 3 hour and 19-minute mark. There should be a marker there if you're watching it on YouTube called like end of video only segment.
The question is, I'd love to see the state of the game mid-development in various aspects. Did puzzle mechanics go through many iterations? When did they start feeling good? How did various areas of the game look as they were being built?
right. Okay, so this area is, of course, like in the final game, is the dice kind of area. But this was like maybe the first version of that I ever shipped to playtesters. So this was like a very early version of the game. So you still had to like hit a button to like go into puzzles, and then hit another button to like go out of puzzles. And one of the big differences with this like mechanic in the early versions was that the color of the pip determined like what the color of the tile needed to be.
So you're like controlling those with keyboard?
Yeah. You had to like interact with the
Is
puzzles.
it like the snake puzzles or?
Yeah. It was that was like. So
Okay.
there's kind of that, but then there were also like these ones where you could toggle it, and you have like a little cursor here. Let me zoom in a little bit, but you had a little cursor where you could toggle it for these, but you still had to like go into the puzzle with a key, and then you moved with the arrow keys around. But yeah, these things had to be like off if they were white and on if they were black, which is kind of counterintuitive, but that was like just how it was. And so you can see there actually wasn't that much of like the toggling puzzles at this point, and there's like sort of two branches here, and there's one branch. I'm getting a little bit of rain, so if it cuts out for you, then let me know. Anyway, so these were just some early puzzles of that type, and you'll kind of notice if you played the final version of the game, pretty much none of these puzzles made it into the final version. Even though like it's a similar mechanic to what's in the final game, it just never made it in because most of these were, well, pretty much all of these were not like good enough. And they're almost all like snake puzzles, because I guess I kind of thought at the time maybe that was like a bigger part of the game, and then this up here is like just a shortcut into what would become the graveyard area.
So when did you decide that the snake puzzles are not going to be bigger part of the game? And why did you decide that?
I don't know. I don't know that I really thought about like specifically that they should be a bigger or smaller part of the game. I think they just naturally became a smaller part of the game. And there were times where I wondered whether they should be in the game at all. Certainly because it was such a small part of the game. I started to think like maybe it's too much like additional complexity for just this small part of the game. But I think
they
that
add a lot of variety.
Yeah, like well, you know, and there was certainly stuff like, you know, if you played the final game, then like this section here would seem kind of familiar, right? So, and this was a very early set of puzzles that I designed. It was like in the first prototype that there ever was of the game. And I still thought that was really interesting. And so there were some things.
How many people did you send the first prototype? Or like in general, like how much playtesting did you do early on?
So I playtested the game with probably not that many people, maybe like 3 people or something. And that was like after maybe the first 6 months or something, that I sent it out some people.
Okay, so you were working on the game, and nobody saw it for first 6 months.
Yeah, well, the game
Except-
started like I said earlier about it started as a kind of Zelda game, and I was actually working with an artist at that time, so he saw
Right.
it.
Yeah.
But then, like, once it kind of pivoted into being more of a puzzle game, then there were maybe another like there was a few months right there, but it wasn't like concerted effort because I had a full-time job that I was doing something else, so it was just in my spare time. So it wasn't like 6 months of like hardcore full-time work on the game. It was just like a few months, really.
So you worked on the game in your free time for how long?
Probably like 5 years.
Okay.
The first 5 years were mostly my free time, but you know, the job that I had was a seasonal job, so there were like parts of the year that I was unemployed, so so that gave me more time to work on the game than I would have had if I had like a normal job, although that started to decrease as time went on, because anyway, that's just how things go sometimes, right? So I had less time away from work to work on the game.
Do you think that there is some value to like having large breaks in working on a game? Because then you like can, if you like don't work on it for a long time, then you can like see it from the fresh perspective when you come back to it.
Well, certainly I think there's a lot of value to just time, right? So even though I didn't work on the game like concertedly for that whole time, and it was really just a spare time thing, I was still thinking about it for that whole time. So it's impossible to like rule that out as a factor, right? Like, could I have made the game faster? I'm not sure, because I'm not sure I would have gotten the ideas any faster than I did. And it is true that it gave me perspective on certain things in a way that maybe I wouldn't have if I was just like in the trenches and I had a lot more time to do whatever. But I don't know. So this is like a little bit later on in development, the same area. So it still had that like weird thing where these couldn't be lit, they had to be unlit. But the interface of the game was more like that. I'm just no clipping, so I can just skip through here. But a lot of these puzzles, unlike earlier, will seem familiar. These ones maybe not so much, but a lot of these puzzles are kind of the same puzzles that are in the final game, right? So things had kind of started to come together here at this time. The subtractive dice were like these red colors, because I was still using colors to like indicate what the rules were about the thing, which was just kind of a bad approach. But that was sort of
the bad approach.
Well, it's never good to have more things than necessary that players have to remember. And like remembering that a color of a particular thing means something is not great. And also it's just that the final usage that I have in the game of color for this symbol is a much better and richer use of color than just using it to tell me, is it on, is it off, or are they a subtractive thing, right? So I would say that, like, as a general rule, you don't want to just use color to indicate things, because it's hard to associate certain colors. Like in this case, maybe it's a natural association with the red and the negative, but oftentimes you're not going to find like natural mappings between that. So like if you've ever played the game Lingo, then Lingo does a lot of stuff where the rules are dependent on colors of things, and it becomes very hard to like remember which color means what, especially when it starts like mixing colors together, and that means that the rules mix together and whatever. So it's kind of interesting in a way, but it puts a lot of burden on the player's memory, which may be an off-topic difficulty point for the game, where it's like it doesn't really make the game better that they have to remember that green means that it's a synonym. You know? So
yeah, and in Taiji, when I was playtesting it, it was already a problem that I like forgot some rules and I had to go back to an area to remember.
Yeah, so you like
What-
already have to remember, but then having like more things where I have to remember what each color of the thing means, it just becomes really hard.
So those red subtractive dots, do they subtract with both white and black dots?
Yeah. Because there was no rule at that time about like not being able to group things of different colors. That just wasn't a thing. It was just implicit in the fact that like black tiles wanted to be lit, and and white tiles wanted to be, or white dots wanted to be unlit, right? So
Okay.
which was already counterintuitive because it's like the opposite of what you'd expect, right? You'd expect the dark one you want to have low lit, and the lit one you want to have high lit, but instead it was the other way because like, well, it looks better that way and it fits the duality theme that way and whatever. But it was very unintuitive, and so it was much better in the final game to just totally dissociate the color of the thing from anything to do with that, because we had locked tiles, which I actually had implemented locked tiles, I believe, before I even decided that these shouldn't care about that. And then it became very obvious because there were two different things that were doing the same function in the game. So because obviously with other types of symbols, they would want to sometimes enforce that this tile be lit or this tile be unlit, right? Just tying it to the symbol is not a good approach there.
Were there like other cases of like you noticing that like two things are similar during the development and you like cut one of them, or you combined them in some way, or something like that?
No, I don't. I think this was the only case where like there was overlap in terms of what the mechanic cared about that was unnecessary. There is a sort of similar thing where part of the graveyard was originally a branch off of what became the ruins area. So the graveyard in like, I don't know if it's in this version or not, but it might already have been arted up in this version, but the early version of the graveyard used like ones and zeros. It didn't use this kind of in and out thing. Right, here it is, right? So they used ones and zeros early on, so the graveyard was actually a branch off of this area, and so I actually ended up doing the opposite thing, which is where like, even though they're kind of the same thing in some way, I split them into separate areas because they felt different enough in their approach. There was also this other like kind of extension of this area that did some other kinds of weird stuff that was not as interesting as what's in the final game as an extension of the basic thing. But it was like, what if we did this in a different axes, basically, right? So it's like doing stuff horizontally and like flipping the orders of things, which some of that happens over here, but I sort of like pulled that out and made that more the focus of the other area, and this area I made into more of a visual area. And it was kind of because like both of those sections were like big enough and different enough on their own that it just felt okay to have them separate. Like you didn't really need to have done this to do this, like they were their own concepts. And, in the final game, there is, although it wasn't originally intended that way, there is a little bit of a nod to the connection between those two things, in that there's like a standalone puzzle to the north of the ruins that has a pillar that's just like one pillar and is like asymmetrical or whatever. So it's a little bit of a nod to the connection between those things, or I think most people take it that way, although it wasn't designed that way, actually. But now I think about it as like, oh yeah, it actually makes sense that it's in between those areas. I don't think there's anything that explicitly overlapped other than that. And it was just because the dice pip thing was like the first thing that I designed of that kind, and I just had some assumptions that I had made about how I would need to make that interesting that were really not true. And eventually it kind of just, I figured out a parallel version of the same mechanic that was more interesting. But anyway, that area consequently, because of that, went through like the most revisions. So this is like a really early version of it, which is kind of a little bit more advanced than the early one that I showed, because it already had the meta puzzle there where you'd have to do these and go through there, but there were only 2 puzzles at that time. So then that went on, and then I had added more there, and it got a little more organized, but I had not done the subtractive dice yet. And then I had another iteration of it, which is pretty close to the second one that we had been looking at, that had all these subtractive dice puzzles over there. And then there was another iteration of it where I added even more stuff to that center nettle puzzle. And this layout, if you really look at it, should seem pretty familiar if you've played the final game, because it's basically the exact same puzzles that are in the final game. You've got your subtractive stuff over on the west side now. On the other side of the meta puzzle, which is like the thing for the longest time that didn't make sense, is I had this like meta puzzle, but there wasn't really anything to like the left side of it. It was just like dead space, and so I threw some kind of puzzles over there arbitrarily because there should be something there that really made sense to put the subtractive dice on that side instead of that side. But that was also part of having introduced that concept of colors with the dice, because that happened between these versions. I mean, it's probably hard to see, but there's a little bit of like the colors over here, right? And so that gave the area naturally like a couple branches that it could go, so there could be something on the right and something on the left that were substantial enough to make sense. So, but yeah, one of my like regrets with this area though was that the art for the area is really similar structurally to this layout. Other than that, I compacted down these puzzles into single panels because that was just a thing I did later. The layout is pretty much just this. There's not really like, I guess I flipped the order of these because this is like the last puzzle of that section. So you used to go down, but now you go up. But so I was too minimalistic in terms of the space with the final area, and I should have kind of thought a bit more about like how I actually wanted that area to look, rather than just, oh, let's take the prototype and just draw over it. So that was kind of the revision process of that area, which is maybe the area that had the most revisions.
Okay, so Jack the Egg asks, regarding the area full of puzzles behind the waterfall, did you plan on doing something with it from a narrative story perspective, or was it just extra puzzles like a similar area that exists in The Witness?
So there never was really like a narrative or story reason behind this area. It was just kind of like, it was just extra puzzles. So, one of the things that happened a lot when I was working on the game is that I'd have puzzles that didn't fit into the progression of the main areas for several reasons. One could just be like pacing reasons, so it just didn't make sense to like have a bunch of these kind of floor puzzles or something in this area. But often it was actually like space reasons. So like, I'd have some idea for a puzzle that was interesting, but it was like huge or whatever. This is actually Elliot Grant's puzzle, but gets across the idea. And so this was a cool puzzle, but it wasn't really clear to me how I was going to do art for a traditional type area that could include a puzzle that was bigger than a building would reasonably be. Like, even if I had like a warehouse, this is still a really big puzzle relative to the size of the player.
I mean, so in some places you did that by putting the puzzle on like a side of a mountain or something. Like,
yeah, that's true. But there weren't a lot of opportunities to like fit in those very big puzzles. But I'd say more often, certainly like these, it was like pacing reasons, right? Where it was just like, if I had all of these puzzles in that sequence in the mill, then the pacing would really drag, right? Like a lot of these would make sense to be in the like later section of that area, but like you've just finally like figured out and made it past that like meta puzzle, the navigation thing there, and then like it just doesn't feel good at that point to like lose momentum by like banging your head against a bunch of really hard puzzles. So hard puzzles like this got cut. Well, really, actually, this one was in the gallery at one point. If you can imagine that, this was like a painting puzzle at one point. As brutally hard as this one is. So really, anyway, my point is a lot of these puzzles were things that I needed to get cut out of areas because they just didn't really work. And part of how I guess satiated myself that I felt bad about having to cut puzzles was that I just stuck them to the side and I said, no, they're going to go in the bonus area, right? And so a lot of those puzzles that I had cut and stuck aside, I went back and I looked at and I was like, why did I even think that this was not something that should be immediately deleted? And so I would just delete them. But some of them were interesting, and so they went into this area. And then there's like a few exceptions, which would be like these, the big brain puzzles here, which were meant to cover the bases of puzzles that used 3 of the different mechanics together. So I just use all of the combos of 3 here. So there would at least be that in the game. There's also like these red ones here are ones that you designed, that you know that, but maybe the audience doesn't. And so these were like specifically, well, this one I think was the same, right? Where it was meant to use all of the symbol types, right? And then the other ones were just, there were kind of some puzzles here, but I thought they were a little weak. So I liked the idea of having a bunch of these kind of floor puzzles here, but maybe they could be better. So I just had you take a crack at them, and they were much better. So, which wasn't hard because they were like on the chopping block anyway, even though I had put them in here because, you have certain things that you do, like you've got 4 puzzles here, and well, that just feels really nice to have 4. So I don't want to delete the 4th one, and then I only have 3. That wouldn't be a nice little shape here. So I guess I'll I don't know, I'll just have it, even though it's kind of mediocre, but then you replaced it with a much better one. But on the narrative question, no. I mean, maybe like the fact that there's all the hidden faces in here or something might make people think that like this is hinting at some kind of particular narrative, but really that was just kind of like just part of the concept for the aesthetic of the area, and that it would be something that was interesting about it that would make it a little extra special and different. So that it wouldn't just feel like a normal area, because I wanted it to feel a little different, right?
Right.
But,
so,
if there was like story, if there was story in the game, I don't know. I don't know what it would be. I'd have to think about that kind of thing. I didn't. It was
why didn't you like put more of like thematic stuff into the art in other areas? I mean, I suppose it would be like maybe too distracting, and this is like bonus area, so it's fine to have all of those hats, although probably some people don't notice them that quickly.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to do some of that stuff. Obviously there's like a statue that's in the gallery that doesn't have anything to do with the puzzles there, right? There's also actually a face hidden in the rocks over here, although it's not a great one, but so I wanted to have more of those kind of things hidden around. It was just kind of low on the list of importance of things, right? And there are some things, right? Like the fact that these stairs are kind of shaped the way they are is sort of a reference to the overall design of the area, and that's like a little subtle thing, right? But yeah, I wanted to have like more statues and things like that, and things carved into rock faces and hidden things to find. But there was just so much to do on the game that like adding even more things that were just for fun to notice that would require additional bespoke artwork to be done. It just kind of is one of the things that got cut, I guess I would say, for the most part. Because it's hard to do those kind of things, right? You have to like both find a natural opportunity for it and then actually put in the time to make it look good, right?
So it wasn't because like those elements would be too distracting in terms of the wide ending puzzles.
No, I don't think so, right? I mean, I would have tried to make them all be like fairly subtle, like this face over here, right? I try to make them be things where like if you didn't really look, then you wouldn't notice them. obviously some people think that like this is meant to be a like hidden kind of fun thing to notice, but it really wasn't intended that way. It's, I mean,
Really?
maybe it,
Okay.
I mean, it is, I guess, but it wasn't intended to be that, right? The intent was really just that I wanted to have the waterfall fall into something that would collect it, and there was gonna be like a water wheel here because like part of the theme for this area was like that it was this gross industrial pollution generating activity that was going to then be powered by like clean energy, and so that's why there's like solar panels, and it was also going to be additionally powered by like water power, and maybe there's a turbine in here or something, right? You could imagine there's something on the inside here, but originally there was going to be like a visible water wheel here, so so really like the space was meant for that water wheel, and if there was a water wheel here, then it would look much less like what people think it looks like.
So why didn't you include the water wheel?
Because it just seemed like it was going to require a bunch of extra bespoke technical art and stuff just for that, and it wasn't that important because it was just a little, it was one of those naive ideas where it's like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if there's a water wheel? And I mean, yeah, it would have enhanced the idea of like this place being powered by clean energy, but there's already solar panels, so it gets the idea across anyway.
Yeah, I think it's much cooler if there's reference to the witness there than if there was a water wheel.
Yeah. So, but my point was is it wasn't intended to be a reference to the witness. I mean, it's fine. There's lots of things in the game that function perfectly well, even though they were not intended to be what most people are going to think that they are. So that's okay.
So what are those other ones?
Well, one example is like you saying earlier about, oh, well, there's, you know, the duality is represented in the fact that there's like positive and negative dice pips. And I was like, oh, well, I wasn't even thinking about that at all. But like, certainly that's true. That's a thing that's in the game. It just was not a part of my thought process when I was designing the thing, right?
Was it part of your thought process when you chose that you only have to like connect two things in the mine? That
No.
Okay.
Neither of those was I thinking about duality and how to represent it in the mechanics. Like I said, that a lot of the stuff was done by feel. Some of the stuff later on, I was thinking about that, but there was certainly, I mean, I've said before to you that I think the music ended up representing a lot of those themes more strongly than anything else in the game. And often that was really just because you and I had to have a conversation about things, right? Whereas when I was just doing things, I'd often just go by like what feels right, and there's no conversation, so it's not like I'm thinking about it on that level, right? Like if I had a conversation, then I'd think about like, oh, does this represent the themes, and should I use this or whatever, because there'd be some analytical process that would be, you know, chosen for certain things, like I think there's a question in here, right, about like colors of the puzzle panels, right? So that's a question that's of a similar variety where it's like, well, you know, why did you choose certain colors for certain puzzle panels? And you know, the one that I always think of is like orange for the mill, because like most of the puzzles here are orange. Some of them are like this where they're gray, but they have like an orange border or whatever. But I definitely am like, orange is a prevailing color for these panels.
Yeah, and it's also, there is a lot of orange and red in the art.
But it was never like thought of as any kind of thematic thing other than just it's the first color that I picked for the puzzles. Like I could certainly pull up an old picture of an early version of this area and you would see that the puzzles were orange then, and there was no art at all. It was just gray box level design, even though there were orange panels. So sometimes it's, well, actually oftentimes it's just that, it's like feel, and then maybe rationalization comes later, unless it's like when you and I were working on the music and then we had to have conversations about these things, and so there was like a rational discussion process about like, well, why that though, right? Rather than oh, I don't know, it just feels good. I mean, some of the music was still like based on what just felt good, right? Like the choice of instruments sometimes didn't really, there was no real like natural reason to pick the instrument. It was just what feels good.
Yeah, like while we were working on the music, there was sometimes also like we just made some decision, and then like the rationalization came later.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. I mean, the choice of like multiple instruments for each area,
Right.
that was kind of part of that. Where then after the fact, it's like, no, there's like a way to make sense of this, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of always that process. I mean, there were certainly some things that I rationalized, like why did I even make this a mill at all? That was definitely a rational decision, because I was like, well, it's, you know, what are you doing with the mechanic? It's like you're copying a thing. And so that made me think about like mass production of something, right? And so I thought of like a factory, and that's why there's like little stacks of these blocks over here, right? It was just the idea that like you're mass producing copies of a thing or something. And that was like, it's a little bit of a shallow interpretation of that, but it was at least like a jumping off point that was rational in that regard. But
What's the deep interpretation?
no, I said it's not really that deep of an interpretation.
Okay.
Right? It's maybe a shallow interpretation, to just say like, oh, it's mass production. I don't know, but having, I feel like having some reason rather than none for your theming is better, right? Like even like as a player, you detect that there's probably some reason, and it doesn't feel random, even though like the reason might be silly, right? I mean, the silliest one is like the mine, where it's like diamonds, and so you mine for diamonds, so it's in the mine. But even some things there were done by feel, because I had like, oh, there's going to be like houses here and a little shanty town kind of thing going on, and so somehow like the idea that like it's a place where people lived but it's also a mine was not really a rationally chosen thing. It was just like a feel thing. And in a way it feels right, because almost all of the areas in this game end up having some kind of like contradictory element or something. Not all of them, but a lot of them do, where there's sort of like it's this but also this or whatever. In this one only really ended up with the like, the only thing I can think of right now is that it ended up with the clean energy, even though it's a polluting industry by its very nature. But the original idea for the area was that all of this stuff was going to be like overgrown with plants that were going to be like reclaiming it. So there's a little bit of that, where like if you go up here, there's like a tree bursting through, but I really wanted like everything to be very like covered in greenery. But the problem became that the environment was not going to be very readable if I did that, so I just stuck to the very like simple shapes.
Which white ending puzzle do you think is the worst?
Probably the plateaus one. That's probably the one I think is the weakest. Oh, you saw that nice little grass tuft glitch that I never could totally iron out. Yeah, this one is probably the weakest one. Like,
this one was like changed very shortly before the release. It was much worse, like 3 months before the release.
Yeah, it was much worse. In some ways, it embodied the theme of the area better, but in some ways, it was significantly worse, right? So one of the things that was worse about it was that it was like literally just over here on this side,
right?
And it didn't involve things on both sides, which made it feel a little weirdly lopsided. But it did actually require like more of an incomplete pattern, and that you needed to like fill out the pattern in a way that you do with the regular puzzles. But it was just sort of ugly. I didn't like it. It was ugly. It was way too obvious, and that was one of the reasons I changed it. It was typically like the first one of those things that somebody noticed in the game, and then it was not. If for it being something that you noticed so early, it wasn't that satisfying to actually solve it. So it was like I set this thing up really early, and then it was disappointing, so it kind of sucked. But I still felt like this was pretty weak, because I could never come up with something that really had all of the like positive negative space kind of thing going on that the main puzzles did, or extrapolating from limited information. Like I wanted both of those things in this, and there's not really that. It's really just a line, and you just kind of have to figure out how to put it together. And I think that's probably fine. People feel like it references the area enough because it's just sort of this path, right? And that's kind of the theme of the area in a way, is these paths. But it's a very weak and tenuous connection, I think, between the regular puzzles and the mega puzzle for this area, whereas all the other ones I feel like are pretty close connection.
So why was the previous version of this puzzle more connected to the area, or fit the area?
Well, because it at least had, like, you've got limited information and you have to, like, fill in the rest of the pattern, right? It was like because these puzzles have a, like, sort of complete the pattern kind of element, and that one had that, whereas this one really doesn't. Like, you're given the complete pattern, it's just like, how do I put these pieces together? But that's okay. It's not terrible. It's just I don't know. It was one of the last ones to get figured out in as much as it was, and I always felt like everything that I tried here was a bit of a compromise, but this was the best one. So if I didn't think it was better than what was there before, then I wouldn't have shipped this. So it's much better than what was there before.
Yeah. So maybe, like, is second worst one the one from the mill? Because it's, like, sort of lame. It's just like you put the panels in the shape of the puzzle and that's it. Put symbols on them. Like, the puzzles in the other areas are, like, more like, take larger area within the area into account.
Yeah.
And, like, fit more naturally.
I mean, they were all kind of like a mixture of how natural I felt it was. You know, the funny thing is, like, the mine one probably feels pretty natural, but was totally a retrofit, right? Like, I did not have. I'm hoping that this gate's up here, because this is not like a dev build. So if the gate's not open, I got to solve the puzzle. But okay. But it was totally a retrofit. This area did not have one at all. It was one of the ones that didn't. I was like, I have no idea what to do. But then I think the idea of, like, incorporating the raft into as a major element of the puzzle that you'd have to figure out that was connected made it feel extremely natural in a way that's kind of surprising. And it was certainly a surprise to me. Because it really was a retrofit, you know. Like, I just went in and I was like, let me add these signs, and what am I gonna do? And actually, there was, like, a much more annoying version of this puzzle originally, because the early version of it had, like, some of the signs were, like, kind of broken, and, like, one was like this, and then there was one that was just, like, missing the piece. It was just a post. And you were supposed to infer, because there was only one other purple one, that the one that was missing must be purple. So there was, like, a lot of additional stuff that got cut from the puzzle, because the puzzle was hard enough and confusing enough without me, like, doing additional fucking around. Because I wanted to, like, avoid catastrophizing on the part of the player, because a lot of play testers that were doing, well, there weren't that many, but some of the play testers that were looking at that were just, like, going down wild paths, because, like, they were like, you know, because you can even notice these signs. That's usually the process for this one, is you, like, notice the signs, you try, like, plugging those in and try to solve it that way, and then that doesn't work, and so then you start, if there's weird shit with the signs, you start thinking, like, maybe I'm wrong about the signs. Maybe they're just signs. So you really don't want that to happen. You want to make sure it's, like, really, really blindingly obvious. Although, you know, there is a little bit of trickery in that I put these ones at the top of the crater. And so if you just look at the bottom, then I think there's not enough, but it's 3 at the top, so it's supposed to be a little bit of a hint, I think, because you got 3 down here, right? Isn't that correct? Oh, maybe you don't. You've got 1, right? Okay, you've got 1 down here, which is, like, not enough. And so that's supposed to cause you to think, like, okay, there must be another yellow here. But what sometimes happened was people thought that maybe this was a yellow, and I don't know. But answering the question of like which one I think is second worst, I don't know. Like the one that I think is the best is the Orchard. It's the most natural. Second best would probably be the Ruins, because it was also very natural. It just happened. Both of those just happened, and I barely had to do anything. It was just like there. So all the other ones were kind of things where I kind of I had to try to make it work, and in some cases maybe it's a good puzzle, and in some cases maybe it's a little over contrived or a little over obvious, or something. But
which ones are overly contrived?
I mean, I kind of think this one is a little overly contrived, but it doesn't. It's the reason I like to point it out is because I don't think if you told somebody, which I did earlier in the podcast, that there were 6 of these that I had put in the game, or 5 or something, I can't remember. Either way, I didn't have one for each area for probably over a year and a half, and then in the last like 9 months of development, I added the rest of them. People probably wouldn't be able to guess which ones were added late. They would not guess that this is one that was added late, because it just feels more natural. But I think Gardens feels pretty unnatural. I think this one feels pretty unnatural. Shrine felt pretty natural, because like I kind of knew when I did the lily pads that like I could hide something in there. So it was just kind of a pretty straightforward thing to just do that.
Yeah, so by saying that it's overly contrived, you meant that it's like unnatural.
Yeah, it's unnatural. I mean that like there's...
Well, I don't feel like this one is unnatural. No.
Well, yeah, I mean, I do a little bit because it was a retrofit, right? But I think it came out much better than I thought it would, for this being an area that when it came time to, I should probably have one of these for each area, not just like a random number of them, because those were the ones that immediately I could think of something to do. Initially, I was like, I have no idea what to do with the mine for this kind of thing at all. So
I mean, I guess this one is like a bit weird, because like you have to like look at 2 things which are totally different. One is the boat, and the other is the signs, and they're like on different different scale. So that's kind of...
And then the Gardens is like even more like that, right? Because you have to look at like 3 different things. I think ultimately, probably most people who play the game don't really think about it like that. They more think about that like some of them are really hard and some of them are much easier, and that it's probably like nice to them that there's like a variety of textures of these things. And typically the Gardens one is the hardest one, and usually that's the one that people figure out the last. So it's probably okay, and it actually gives that whole section of the game a bit of a dramatic arc, because then you have a thing that's much harder than the other things, and if that's the last thing you do, then like you feel like when you go and punch that in at that thing, I better get the ending of the game, right? Like you don't expect like there to be another puzzle that you have to do after that, right? Which would be like
a mega puzzle. We have to take into account the whole map, solve it.
Right. Well, there is the map one also, but
oh yeah. Well, but that one is kind of... Yeah, I guess it's like good that this one, like you have to look at 2 things. I don't remember the Gardens one exactly, but because it like just gives more variety to those puzzles. I didn't feel like that was bad. Could you go for a moment to Shrine? So in the Shrine area, there is this pattern on the grass in the northeast part of the Shrine, and like some people like who have played the Witness already, they like think, oh, this is going to be an environmental puzzle. So that's why I asked back when you were in the bonus area, I asked why wasn't the reason for not putting like more of the things, like you have this checkerboard thing here, that it would confuse people in terms of the wide ending puzzles.
It's true that sometimes people thought that, and for the longest time this was like actually the same dimensions, which was even worse as the white puzzle, but I like added some extra little nicks in it out here so that it's a little bit too big. But yeah, so the reason for that was really just that ultimately these puzzles here are like, they are checkerboarding, right? Like I mean, you can kind of think the tiles are different shapes, but like it's fundamentally like alternating black white black white black white, right? That's just what you're doing with these. And so I was emphasizing that tiling kind of checkerboarding thing with a little bit of an environmental flourish there, but it maybe stands out because it isn't as subtle as like these things or something where there's just colors of flowers, right? Because there's like colors of flowers here, and then you've got colors on the puzzles, and actually like the colors kind of line up here with the actual flower beds there in the top left corner, which is sort of random, but that's how it is. You know, those are the kind of things that I said before, like I wanted to do more of those kind of things in the game, and there are some of them. But it's true that part of the problem is that I don't do that many of them. And so maybe when I do them, they stand out more and they feel more like, oh, maybe that's got to be part of that. But like, yeah, so it is true that like that would be an additional challenge in doing those things. Like if I wanted to hide more things in the environment, it would be an additional challenge to make sure that they don't confuse the player as far as the hidden things that are supposed to be clues to puzzles, right? So it could have been another reason to not do it. But it honestly, like a lot of it was really just that there was so many things to do, and it was less important. Like,
yeah, so why did you think it was important at all to put them there?
To like have this or something?
Yeah.
Well, because I wanted to have those kind of things in the game, and some of them just came up and they were just really natural and really easy. So like this was a situation where it was really easy for me to do this. It didn't take very long. Whereas doing more involved things takes longer and takes more forethought, right?
So why did you want to have those things in the game?
Because it's fun to have things in a game for you to notice, right? Especially if they're like, there's some reason for them that ties into the themes of the game somehow, right? I mean, I played The Witness, right? And obviously that's part of it. And I played Braid, and both those games have those kind of things in them. Like the remaster of Braid has even more of those kind of things in it, where there's just things in the environment to notice that reference things, right? You know, like this building is shaped like this because this is a rotationally symmetrical shape, and inside of this building you do a mechanic that involves rotationally symmetrical shapes, right? So it's just kind of a fun thing that you might notice if you were really looking and thinking about those kind of things. Now, I don't think the game has exactly a richness to it where there's enough of those things to where you would be justified in like looking all around the game for that kind of stuff and trying to ask the question of why is this the way that it is, because oftentimes the answer is it's just arbitrary. You know, but there are some things, like this is one too, right? Like this is the way that it is because this is what the solution to the third puzzle here looks like, which is, you know, maybe a little random, but I don't even remember what I'm doing with this puzzle apparently, because this has to be this or something. Well, clearly I don't remember how to do this puzzle, but in any case, that's something for it's something for people to investigate. You know, there's some more random ones, like the little thing down there is shaped like a hand, and that was kind of just because it came up because I was drawing the roots and somebody said, oh, this looks kind of like a hand. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll make it look more like a hand.
But how does the hand connect to? What does the hand connect to there?
It doesn't really connect to anything.
Okay.
But I mean, that's the thing, is sometimes like you do things and there's not a conversation. Like I said, when you and I were doing the music, there was a conversation about everything. So
where is this hand, by the way?
It's over here. The roots of this look a little bit like a hand. So
Okay.
and it's just because I was doing roots there, and somebody said it looked kind of like a hand, so I thought, well, I'll make it look more like a hand. Which is sometimes just how I approach things, because it's like, oh, well, I could stamp that down and like, and make it to where nobody's going to think it looks like a hand. Let me change it real quick. But then instead I thought about it like, well, would that be interesting to notice if a player noticed that it looked like a hand? And I thought, well, it might be interesting. So does it have anything to do with the theme of this area? No. And so maybe that's a reason that you could justify removing it. But I don't know. Games are big and complicated, and they have a lot of things in them, and not everything makes sense. You know, why is there a tree over here exactly? So it's like, well, because it felt nice to have a tree there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I guess like, well, like adding those things is like the same kind of thing, like with the themes of the visual themes of the areas and a lot of stuff that we put into the music. And like the reason to do it is just like, well, it maybe makes the game just like 3% better or something, but it's better that the game is 3% better than it's not being 3% better.
Yeah, well, like why is there a turtle in The Witness?
I didn't know about that.
Okay, well, there's a hidden turtle in the game. So why is there a hidden dog in The Witness? You know the dog at least, right? No?
No.
Okay. Well, there's a statue of a dog in The Witness.
Okay.
Sometimes they're just things that are fun, right? And it's okay, because as long as it's not damaging the integrity of the work, it's okay to have little Easter eggs in there sometimes, I think.
What went into deciding the colors of the panels? So you sort of talked about it a bit already, but you can...
Oh, right. So there is another angle on that, right? Which is a lot of the panels in the game are just kind of gray. And this is not, well, I mean, there's a gray one here, but it's not a great example. But generally speaking, the reason a lot of them were gray was just because they have symbols embedded into them, and the symbols oftentimes needed to be like 3 or 4 different colors, and readability becomes a problem if you also have the puzzle have some kind of weird color, right? So that's like why a lot of the puzzles over here are just gray, right? Because it makes the colors of the symbols stand out better, right? And to just put it on a neutral color. I think there was like, at some point you had a question in here about like color blindness and whether I had considered that.
Yeah.
Which sort of dovetails with this. Which is to say that yes, I definitely did consider whether or not colors were colorblind friendly. I do think there's some mistakes that I made, but oftentimes it was hard for me to spot those mistakes. I did look over, I would say, the majority of the game with like some filters that are designed to help you spot those kind of issues. But I have had players complain about certain puzzles, and usually I would try to fix those puzzles. But oftentimes I found people would complain about a puzzle, and I would try to get with them to have an ongoing discussion about that, because it was useful to me, like if they could point out any other puzzles in the game, and then they would never follow up. So it was sometimes tricky to find or get feedback on that part of the game. But typically I tried to pick colors that I thought worked well. Some people seem to still have a problem with the light blue and white. So because the value difference is a little subtle, and some people don't see the blue super strongly. That seems to be fairly rare. So most puzzles in the game, I tried to go for this blue and yellow and black and white, which was pretty distinguishable for most people. But ideally, you would not just use colors to differentiate things that much, because you're always going to run into problems where some people can't differentiate the colors very well.
So how would you do it if the game wasn't pixel art?
If
it
the
was
game
higher-
wasn't pixel art, you know, at that point you could have something where you differentiate things with like a pattern or something on it. Obviously it would require, it wouldn't work so well even if it wasn't pixel art with things like this, because the like surface area of the shape is pretty small. And so it would be hard to differentiate a pattern. Like with something like this, it would be pretty easy to stick a pattern on it. And you could be like, oh, this is like got checkerboards on it, or this one's got like little stars or whatever. And that would be some way to additionally differentiate between them. But you could also just have, for some things, like just have a letter or a number on it that tells you which category it's in. I don't know.
But they would still have colors and a symbol or a letter in addition to a color, or would
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I had considered some things were like accessibility options that you could have. I never added them because there wasn't enough like outcry about it from people to really feel like it needed to have it. But you could have something fairly easily that would just be like a button that you could hit that would like highlight all the things that were like the same color as the one that you're hovering over, which would be, that would help like probably 90% of everybody, because they could like hover over a thing and see like, oh, that's not the same color as that. Or if they had a question, right? Like a lot of times people with color blindness, they sort of know that they aren't sure about whether two colors are the same color or not. And so just having a tool that's like tells you these are all the same color and these are all the same color would probably have been useful. But I don't know. And even if I put that in, there's always like the possibility that the players that it would be useful for don't discover that it's a thing in the game. You know, even if I have like a thing in the menu and you go down and there's like accessibility and then there's some option there, it's like, do they understand what it means and how to use it? And I don't know.
All right, so now Matthew is going to go through the mine, and he's going to say what the topic of each puzzle is, because in his lecture, new upcoming lecture, there's a lot of slides that are about topic and things being on topic and the concept of aboutness. So the question is like, what are the puzzles? What is like each puzzle in the mine about?
Right. Yeah, well, and I had looked through this previously, and I felt like, I mean, I still feel like for some puzzles I'm not sure, but I guess I'll get to that when I get to that. So, you know, the initial puzzle is like, I mean, it's pretty obvious what it's about. It's just meant to like introduce the concept of that there's these symbols and there's like not many different ways you can do this puzzle, and probably the first thing you do is correct or whatever. But it's just sort of planning the idea of there's these symbols. So the elevator is also planning the idea of how these elevators are going to work later, so that it doesn't like totally come out of nowhere, but you know, maybe it's a little odd. But if you've had like no familiarity with the floor puzzles, then maybe it's a little confusing, but it's okay, right? And it's still just sort of planning that idea, and maybe you get a little bit of an idea there that those things are supposed to be connected, but it's subtle, right? So then when you do the first one of these, it's like, okay, there's two things, and like, what do I do, right? And of course you could just leave it like that, but most people probably do something. They probably like light them up or try connecting them because they were connected in the other ones. And it's like, okay, they're connected, right? And then as a follow-up to that, because they thought, okay, they're connected, right? If they didn't do this, which they probably didn't, then like this seems weird. Like, okay, how do I connect them, right? I can't connect them because there's like this line in the middle that's dark. So it's already a little bit of like a surprise on that of like, oh, right, you can connect them with dark areas, right?
Do many people guess on the first puzzle in this sequence that you're supposed to connect them?
That you're supposed to connect them?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think generally speaking, the most common thing is people just try lighting up symbols, and then like that doesn't work, and you know, maybe they just fill in the puzzle and it works. I don't know. You know, they probably don't have a strong idea about how that works, but you know, they've had a few examples that might suggest that they're connected in some way. So I guess I expect this puzzle to be the point where they've thought about connecting them, and then the twist to be that you can connect them through dark cells, right? So I don't know, other than like whether it works for people and makes sense, and it mostly seems to. So and then again, this would like follow up on that, where if somebody tried to just light the whole thing up, then it doesn't work. So they kind of learned that like, okay, maybe they need to be paired or something. It's not quite clear, but they've learned that they could be connected by lit or by unlit, right? But they can't put them all together. They're all supposed to be like pretty easy right now, to where maybe you don't have a super strong idea of how it works, but
Yeah, so I suppose the topic of the third puzzle in the sequence is that you have to do 2 pairs now. That's the first puzzle that introduces that.
Yeah, well, and so even the thing of like every puzzle should have a topic or whatever, which is maybe an aspirational point in the lecture. You know, I often think about things like this not in terms of the individual puzzle, but in terms of like there's sort of a narrative of points that are being made, and I'm kind of hitting these points as you move along the sequence, and it's kind of like putting certain things in your mind and maybe like modifying what came before in some way, right? So even here, right, it's not really that different than what we just did, but, well, I don't know. It's a mix, right? Because this one's like kind of is its own topic, and this is like this is a whole thing. It's probably more than I can get into right now, but there's a Gestalt principle thing, which is like you tend to group like things together. So people will tend to look at this one, and because they're lit, they will mentally group them together, and so they'll probably try to group them together by doing this, right? But the puzzle is, of course, impossible if you try to group these two together, right? You have to group these with these. So it's just exploiting the fact that like your natural inclination is to want to group those 2 corner pieces together, right?
Yeah, it's kind of surprising how much time it takes some people to solve this puzzle, probably.
Yeah. And then like this is kind of like a similar thing, except this one is like you're probably thinking, okay, I need to group, right? Okay, I need to group. Well, that doesn't work because those are separated. Okay, maybe like, okay, these are dark, so maybe they need to be grouped, and okay, they're not together. So like this one is meant to like just generate a conundrum in your mind where you're like, there's no way I can do this, right? Because those are the kind of moves that you've made before, even though you've done this kind of thing before. So it's like you should kind of know something about that because it was stymieing you earlier, right? When you were trying to connect through there, I can't because there's a diagonal, right? So obviously, like that's the solution here. It's just you have to do it as an inverse, right?
Yeah, it's sort of a pattern break to this sequence.
Because typically you're just like kind of, you can easily connect the things, except this one, right? But this was meant to plant the idea that then is going to come back here, right? So that this doesn't feel totally out of left field. But, you know, many players probably don't really notice the connection between that and that. But as Mr. Plinkett would say, but your brain did. So this is like just introducing more, and, you know, a player might think that, I mean, if they've not played The Witness, if they played The Witness, then maybe at this point they start thinking that it's like the thing in The Witness. But if they've not played The Witness, then like this helps them disambiguate that it's like not something like you have to do half of them or something, right? Or it's not like it has to be an even number or something, right? Or any number of things that you could think. So it's like, no, okay, it's actually just pairs of 2. And in case you got lucky with that, then this is a little bit more of a complicated puzzle that's then going to like require you to do that in some way that's not immediately obvious, but you're not likely to accidentally do without having understood that they're supposed to be paired, right? Which is, again, kind of what we're doing here. But this is like another like just slightly tricky thing. So really at this point we're just doing slightly tricky things. You know, I think like if you did Gestalt principle here, maybe it's a little bit, because the other thing that people tend to do is group things that are close together. So people will want to like group that, and they'll like want to group these together, and then like that doesn't work because now these are different. So okay, maybe I'll try grouping these off, and okay, that doesn't work because those are still not together. So it's a little tricky just because you have to like group all the way from this corner to this corner, right? And so they're not even remotely close, and it's violating like the fact that these two things seem like they should go together because they're close, right? But they're just trying to be like some tricky puzzles. Then this one is meant to be just funny, right? Because it's like, oh no, oh god, right? But it's actually really simple, right? And this is a much reduced version of a way earlier version of this idea, because there was a version of this puzzle that was like 8x8 or something. It was just huge, right? So you like did some puzzles, and then you came to this huge puzzle, and you're like, oh god. But the problem was that it was just too tedious and annoying to fill in the checkerboards on that puzzle. So it was like the balance between the feeling of somebody initially thinking, oh no, this is going to be terrible, and then figuring out how it's going to work versus how long it took them to actually like fill out the puzzle once they knew how it worked. Like the kind of the fun had wore off, and they're like, this is kind of tedious. So it just ended up being a very small version of that idea. And this one doesn't have really a particular idea. I just always found that this puzzle was like, for being a relatively small puzzle, was relatively difficult. And that's just because it has this like little, you have to like separate on the diagonal in this spot here in a way that's not so obvious. And that just felt good because it felt good to have a hard puzzle to end the sequence, right? So that's kind of why that's there, even though like the only thing I could say idea-wise that it has is that this bit of like separating entirely diagonals, right, in this kind of tiling way, this checkerboarded way, right?
Yeah, does it usually feel bad when you end a long sequence of puzzles and you don't have like a difficult puzzle at the end?
Yeah, if there's not like a twist or an increase in difficulty at the end, then it tends to feel anticlimactic when you finish a set of puzzles. Like people just expect when they come to the end of a thing that there's like a little flourish there, right? That makes it feel like, okay, and that's the end of that, right? I mean, that was what I said earlier about like it's possible that the heterogeneous texture of the difficulty of the environmental puzzles in the game lends that to have a bit more of that feel, right? Of a dramatic arc of like, okay, there was a really hard one, and then it feels good, right? Whereas oftentimes I think that's why in like the black ending, people feel like maybe there should have been more, because maybe they end up doing one of the easy ones last, right? And it just feels like, oh, I thought there would be something hard to cap this off. So I don't know how much in depth we want to go further here, but I'll just kind of give the rough overview, which is like the puzzles on the left side here. The general topic is just to be challenging puzzles that only use one color of diamond, right? To that end, though, this puzzle here is a bit of a violation of that, but I honestly think that's just kind of something where I maybe didn't think about it. You know, maybe there's a benefit that like it would be a very rare possibility that you went over here first, but if you went over here first, then maybe you don't get like free access to these gates unless you like know how the multicolors work. But basically nobody goes there first. Obviously the raft puzzle, the idea of the raft puzzle is obvious. It's a connection between the movement of you on a walking grid puzzle and the movement of the raft. Maybe it's not obvious, but I think it should be obvious.
Yeah, so the puzzles in the left building, I guess they like don't have very strong very high aboutness to them. They're just like
Yeah.
some more difficult maze puzzles with those mechanics.
Yeah, they're kind of just like giving you a little bit more challenge with the basic thing, which has some value in and of itself to like filling out the middle part of this area to where it, because if you like didn't have that, you'd just go from really basic ones straight to the end, right? Without like exploring this general topic at all, right? Now each of these puzzles is like trying to be difficult, typically in that same kind of Gestalt principle-esque way, where like the things that you are going to naturally want to group don't work. Either things that are close together or things that are both high lit or whatever, right? But you know, there's not maybe strong topics to those puzzles the same way that there is with like, I don't know, some of the puzzles in the game have stronger topics. And then this side over here is like, again, it's just like exploring multicolor, right? So the whole first section, it's like, well, it's just like the concept of like, can you group these or not? And it's not exactly made clear to you at this point, but you know, you kind of group pairs, so it just makes sense to do that. And then this is like playing on that earlier puzzle where you had like the diagonal, except like you then have to violate what you've learned before, which was the idea that there's only two, because there's just no way to do it without grouping them all together, right? Here we've got like, you know, then we're starting to just have things that are a little bit more like mazes on that subject, right? To kind of fill out an intro sequence and give you a little bit of trickiness. And then this one adds like an additional color, right? And has, yeah, well, and I guess some of these are like reintroducing like multiple pairs of the same color, right? So that you have some of that, like not being able to group everything together again. But that's basically what the right side is intended to be. Could these puzzles be better? Maybe. You know, this one was like these ones were meant to be like a little bit tricky in that like they sort of lead into each other and are similar, right? But they have like very different kinds of solutions. I think this one you can do this way also. And this one specifically was meant to be a bit of a conundrum because like you know that this needs to be connected, and so it's like about finding a path through here that doesn't touch more than two of these, right? But that also leaves these ones doable, right? Which then involves kind of filling in a little bit of extra space there.
So do you feel that maybe if you like contracted some puzzle designer to like try to come up with better puzzles for some of those maze puzzles, like Islands of Insight has a lot of like good maze puzzles that are like that. So
yeah, I felt like if I had taken the approach where I had brought on more people to help with puzzle design, then there definitely would have been less, let's say, gaps in the game where there weren't really strong ideas, and it was more just like I had to hit the overall general topic, right? Like like it wouldn't feel good if I didn't have some a little bit harder puzzles that used all the same color symbols, right? And it wouldn't feel good if I didn't have some little bit harder puzzles that used colors, right? And it was an iterative process for sure, right? Like these weren't like the first puzzles that I had to follow up on that. These came later, and they're better than what was before. But could they still be better? Yeah, probably. There could have been some better puzzles there. So, you know, there's always like multiple spinning plates or whatever that you have to keep going, and sometimes those are like the individual quality of each individual puzzle, and some of those are just like that you need to have something that hits the overall topic of that combination of mechanics or whatever, right? It's like the same down here where I have like these walking puzzles, where I wanted to do some puzzles that used the walking thing that weren't like the navigation one, right? And then these were mostly the idea comes from there being 3 puzzles, right, that are very similar structurally, but nevertheless they have very different solutions, right? That's like the main idea here, right? So like the first one, you have to like go to the right. The second one, if you go to the right, doesn't have the same solution at all. It's totally different. And then this one, I don't think you can even do by going to the right. But you also have the additional color added in, and so that changes it. And, you know, they're very similar structurally, but they end up with very, very different solutions. And that was interesting to me as a way to, like, give this more of an overall topic, right? It's like, you know, there's a common thing in, like, music improvisation, right? That, like, if you screw up, it's a mistake. If you do it again, then now it's a thing, right? Now it's on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's part of the improvisation. It's not a mistake, right? So there's something about that, about like the refraining on the same kind of idea multiple times can oftentimes add more meaning to it, because you see like connections between the ideas.
Sure. Is it okay to say that, like, if there is like a sequence of puzzles, then it's okay if not every individual puzzle has a topic, but like the whole sequence should always have a topic?
Well, I mean, this is something that I say in the lecture, but the lecture is still forthcoming. But, you know, there's different levels of analysis of topic, right? So I do think the important thing is purpose. It's like every puzzle should have some purpose in the game. If it doesn't have a purpose, then like, why is it there? But topic, at a high level, I think it has to have a topic, but that's usually related to the purpose, right? If like it just needs to cover certain ground or include certain mechanics, or you know, functionally there needs to be a puzzle that like opens a gate here or whatever, right? Those things are very important. And I do think that like if you have a sequence of puzzles, then usually it has some general topic. I just think the thing you want to avoid is just putting a bunch of puzzles in the game just so that there's a bunch of puzzles. And the closest that I ever came to that in this game was the bonus area. But that area is a bonus optional area for people who feel like even though they've done everything else in the game, they want more. And so for those people, it's not so bad to just have a bunch of puzzles. Although I still would say like the equivalent area in the Witness is a better area because it tends to have puzzles that have stronger topics and sequences in there of totally new ideas that aren't explored elsewhere in the game. Whereas, you know, the function here was more to like, there's a few things there that have topics, right? There's like the Matryoshka puzzle where you do the puzzle, and then there's a bigger puzzle that includes that puzzle in it, and that keeps going for a few layers. And there's at least one of the big brain puzzles is like that, where it has a very specific topic, but a lot of the puzzles in there are just more puzzles. But I think you just don't want the bulk of your game to be like that.
Which puzzles in the game do you think are the best?
That Matryoshka one, I really like the idea of it. I think that the actual puzzle could be stronger. Probably the single best one is the one that's over in the mill that mixes in diamonds, the big one there that's got like rotational symmetry that carries across this big puzzle, and you have these like cascading things of like, okay, I need to avoid picking up this diamond, so that the line has to go left, and that means that the line on the other side has to go right, and whatever, right? That one's a really good one. That one's probably the best one. Oh, I don't even have access to it, but it's the one up there, you know.
Which area was the hardest to design?
I mean the in-game area, but that's for like technical reasons because I went in the wrong direction for many months. But then once I actually got the right direction, the area was done pretty quickly. outside of that, I mean, probably the dice pips, because like I said, it went through so many iterations, and it was like one of the biggest earliest biggest area. I don't know, right? It was like that combo of like being relatively early on and also being very big and complicated. And there was a lot of work to try to like whittle the area down and keep it interesting, but not make it so small that it was hard to follow. So that took a lot of time. And I mean, there was some additional iteration on that was happening very close to release, because I had you go in there and like replace at least one of the puzzles, I think.
Yeah. Okay. How did the game sell on Nintendo Switch, and was it worth it to port the game to it?
I mean, it's selling okay. It's you know, it didn't do well. The question of whether it was worth it from a financial standpoint, no. From a creative standpoint, maybe. I said I was going to do it, and so I did it because I said I would. I think that it's good to have it there for people to play it. I've been lucky that Nintendo has put out a successor to the Switch that is backwards compatible, so people can play it on a new console, and I don't even have to do anything. So that's good, and in the long run, it probably won't pay for itself, but I don't regret doing it, but maybe it wasn't the wisest thing to like at least to spend that much time on it, because I could have got it out much quicker if I just compromised and said it's going to be 30 FPS on Switch. Like that would have been way easier to hit. A huge reason why it took so long was just because I was so serious about that. I wanted it to be 60 FPS all the time, no frame drops, and I more or less got there. There's a few spots in the game where if you like stand there and pause and open up the pause menu, then there's some frame drops on the pause menu, but that's probably fine.
Yeah, but you also like optimized the game for PC at the same time, and
That's
it
true.
didn't. At launch, it had those like when you were running around the world, sometimes it would like drop a few frames when you were like running in between areas because of how you did culling.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
So there were some benefits that even people who play the game on PC, which is probably still going to be most people, they can experience those benefits that the game runs better, and if they have an older computer, then they'll have less problems like hitching or long load times or whatever, right?
Yeah. Is it good that The Witness almost doesn't have music?
All right. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's good in The Witness because the point of The Witness is like for the game to present you with something that's a bit of an unfiltered experience, or like you're supposed to have an encounter with like unmediated perception as part of the game, right? Like that's part of the idea of the game, right? Is that you stop looking and start seeing or something, right? Like that's part of the game, and like the player cannot have that kind of meditative experience if they're listening to music. Because music, well, that's too much of a rabbit hole to go down. maybe you had some point you wanted to make about that.
No, I mean, I guess I agree with you. I mean, I understand that is the reason that The Witness doesn't have music. Although, well, I'm not like, I mean, it has a little bit of music. It has like, well, throughout the game in different places, there are those like very quiet paths, and like at the very end of the game, there are a little bit louder paths, but they're still quiet. And obviously, there is the music in the challenge room. So Yeah, it's interesting, like because the entire game doesn't have music, and then when you go to the elevator ending of the game, and it has those quiet parts, it's like hits you more strongly than if the rest of the music had had music as well, because of the contrast sonically between that and the rest of the game. Sort of like similar thing. There is a movie called Castaway, for which Alan Silvestri composed the music, and almost like most of the movie doesn't have any music. I mean, there is, if I remember correctly, there is like a bit of music at the beginning before the character is alone on a island.
A desert island.
Yeah. But it's only like music, for example, like if when they're in a restaurant, there is like music playing in the restaurant. It's not score, and the score starts playing in when the character finally manages to escape the island, or he manages to build a boat or whatever that is good enough to escape the island. And because the rest of the movie didn't have music, it's like is more impactful at that moment. And well, it fits well with this theme of deserted island, that there is like no music. I don't know if it makes sense, but
yeah.
So maybe that's like another reasons why The Witness doesn't have music.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say like what's the exact reasoning why The Witness didn't have music. Like, I mean, one reason that John certainly gave before was like, well, because there's like audio puzzles, right? And but that's clearly not enough of a reason, because you could still have music and have audio puzzles. You just have to like make the cues for the audio puzzles louder than like the normal music.
Or very different.
Or very different or whatever, right? So it's true that that kind of thing is more natural, but I don't think that's enough of a reason to not have music in the entire game. I think like the reason is because there's not music in the background of your life, and the game is trying to be analogous to like what it's like to be a person in the world that's looking around.
Yeah, it's trying to be very, very realistic.
Yeah.
So that's another reason.
Okay, so for a little bit of change of pace, and I think to like wrap up the whole podcast, since most of this has been like questions directed at me, although there are sometimes that you had some things to contribute to a question because you had some additional thoughts, or they were just your question and so you elaborated on it. I think it would be good to ask you some questions. So
sure.
Okay, so the first question that I was interested in hearing was, how did you first hear about Taiji, and like, why was it interesting to you at that time? And additionally, how did you like find out or decide that you wanted to play test the game? And then what were you thinking about the game after you had tested it at the time?
Sure. So, so a few years ago, I started making a weird experimental puzzle game that was partly inspired by The Witness, but it was very different from The Witness. But The Witness was like the closest game to it that I played at that time. And then I was watching a lot of lectures by Jonathan Blow, and I suppose, if I remember correctly, because of that, just YouTube algorithm recommended your lecture to me from 10 years ago called Do's and Don'ts of Honest Game Design, and I watched that. And then I probably just clicked on your channel to see what else you had to offer, and there were Taiji devlog videos there. And so I learned that about the game, and I was interested in it because it was even slightly closer to my game than The Witness, although still very far away. Mostly because Taiji is 2D and my game is also 2D, not 3D, like The Witness. So yeah, so I was following your video devlogs for a while. I watched all of them, and at some point, I think I wrote an email to you asking whether I could playtest the game, but like in exchange, I wanted you to playtest my game at some point. I said it was not ready for playtesting yet, but I wanted you to playtest it like in a few months. And I think you thought that was weird. This guy is weird, and like you responded that like some, I don't remember exactly what you wrote, but then I responded to that, and then you ghosted me. So
sorry, I don't remember this.
Yeah, it's fine. But later on one of your video devlogs, you said that there's a Discord server. So I joined the Discord server and I introduced myself there, and I asked again there whether I could playtest the game, and a few months later you let me playtest the game.
Cool. So you were just sort of proactively looking to playtest the game. It wasn't even like that I had mentioned anything that I was looking for testers or anything.
No, I really wanted to play this game because I watched besides the devlog videos, I also watched the trailer, the first teaser trailer for the game, and I thought there were a lot of cool ideas in this game and I really wanted to play it. So at that time I didn't have any money almost, so like part of the reason why I playtested it is because I could play the game for free, but then like also it was a nice way to practice English talking to.
Oh, cool. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So after you had played it,
after I played it, I thought like that it was like one of the best games I ever played, and so then I saw that there were some guest puzzles in the game, and I asked you whether I could design some guest puzzles for the game, and like the reason why I wanted to design puzzles for the game was just because I thought the game was so good, and I thought it would be like an honor to like contribute to it in some way.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, I can relate to that feeling right now with like I'm playtesting Order of the Sinking Star, and that there's a desire to contribute to the thing in some way, right? Right. So I'm wondering, like, of the like puzzles that you had ended up contributing to the game, like, are there some that you liked the best, or some that you don't like?
To be honest, I haven't looked at them at all since I designed them, I think because I was just worried that they are not good, especially those one in the north part of the bonus area.
Right.
I'm worried that they're probably the worst puzzles in the game. So that's why I haven't looked at them. The snake ones I think are okay. And
I think a couple of them are like really good. I really liked the ones that I ended up sticking in the main areas were the ones that I thought were the best, right? The bonus area, like, it was kind of enough, I think, that they had a different flavor, right? Like, you could tell something was different about them, which is sort of like, to the point earlier about whether you hire other people to contribute puzzle design and does that make the game better? And it's like, well, definitely, like, people have different perspectives and they make different things. So, so even if those puzzles maybe are like, they're not like the strongest idea, they just felt different. So,
yeah. So I actually I was surprised when I talked to you a few months ago. You said that you like really like this little puzzle I made for the subtractive part of the shrine area.
Mm-hmm.
And I was surprised by it because I thought it was just like a very small puzzle, but you said like, oh, this one is really good. So I
Yeah,
think
because it's a really cool idea.
This one is probably the best because you think it's the best. So
So that one's a really cool idea. And then there's one that went into the gardens area.
yeah.
Which I think it just uses like 0, like the fully purple flower, right? That you're not allowed to like have anything connected to. But it's cool because it's like surprising the way it snakes around, and you end up covering every single tile on the board except for the symbols. So like you don't think it's going to end up that way. And so I really like that one for that reason, because you think like you're going to have to do something else, because it just seems like such a random arrangement of those symbols that then like you can just fit the thing in there. And so it's cool. I really liked that one. But you know, it fits, like both of these, it's like they're good because they fit in that context, right? So the reason both of those ended up, well, the one with the subtractive dice pips was like intentionally I wanted you to look at that section because I always thought it was weak, and I just thought if there's anything you can contribute there, then it'll make it better. But the one in the gardens, it was like originally that was supposed to be for the bonus area, but then I thought that was a little too easy for the bonus area. But if it was stuck right in that section, it was like the right level of difficulty to really kind of shine there, right? Because it's like the context in which the player runs into the puzzle really affects what they think about it, right? Like it could be a cool puzzle, but they're like, this is like really basic, like why is this here?
Yeah.
So.
And it's it just happened to fit into the mega puzzle, right?
Right. That was true too. It just happened to fit in. I think I had to like shuffle a little bit, but there was a spot for it that would work. It wasn't doing anything that was going to require me to change it, at least. Okay, so obviously you recomposed most of the music, like 90% we said earlier, for Taiji. So what did you think, like what caused you to feel like that was a good idea? Because like presumably the overall state of the music in the game when you play tested it was kind of dire.
Yeah, I mean the music was fine, but it was not on the level of all of the rest of the elements of the game. So I mean, I really didn't think about recomposing music before you commissioned me to compose the piece for the white ending.
Right. Yeah, well, okay. I remember that a little bit because the story there was like, I think I was just like complaining about that I had to do this music for this thing, and it was just like a laundry list of all these things that I had to do to get the game over the finish line. And so I think you just
I think I like after making those puzzles, I like asked you whether there was something else I could help you with.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Because I remember that you were like very exhausted, and you didn't want to work on this game anymore, and you didn't have a lot of money and time left. So I was just wondering whether I could help you in something. I also like tried to like push it. No, let's like try to make the game a little bit better, even though you're exhausted.
Yeah, that's true. We had a whole argument about that, like me being tired was not an excuse or whatever, which was true, although I was tired, and I might have been slightly less tired by the time we shipped, but you were definitely tired by that time. So I do remember that, and I remember like the reason that I chose to take you up on composing some music for the wide ending was just because you had done so many puzzles already for the game, and I thought you contributed there, and you had done that totally for free, and so it was like, well, you know, even if like this music piece turns out to be trash, then like I'll be paying you back for that somehow, because it was kind of like weird to be like have so much stuff, because you had contributed more guest puzzles than any of the other guest puzzle designers, I think. I mean, I guess sort of later, Jeffrey contributed quite a few of those pillar puzzles, but that was kind of all just sort of like one idea, I guess. So you proceeded to compose like 90% of the music for the game.
Yeah.
And so this is something that kind of I obviously know, but I think might be interesting story for the audience, which is like, what was the most challenging piece of music to compose for the game?
Wait, maybe it's like worth telling like why, how did that happen? That like you let me recompose the music for the game, because like the game had
Oh right. Well, I mean,
music.
so I mentioned that a little bit. Maybe it got cut from your side, but
Okay.
so the reason that I decided to go from just that commission of the one ending piece that I was like willing to do, because even if it sucked, was because it was actually really good. And it was much better, I thought, than even like if I had written that piece, than it would have been. Foreshadowing. It didn't survive to release, but nonetheless, it was very good. And so I don't know, it was like a combination maybe from both sides, where both you and me were starting to think about the concept of recomposing the music, and that better could be done there.
So I think you just like made a joke, or maybe you said it half jokingly that
oh yeah,
well if this probably you should recompose then the music for the entire game.
yeah, it was probably
because-
something like that. It was so much better.
Yeah, because like there was like too much contrast between this piece I did and the rest of the music in terms of quality. You thought that it like didn't fit into the rest, and it felt weird.
Yeah. So it was probably a joke, and then like it sort of became less of a joke. And then the like.
And then I had a lot of ideas for like how what are the problems with the current music, and how to improve them. And what to do there.
So then it became more and more feeling like we should do it. The thing I was unsure of at that time was like whether or not it was going to be as good, and whether the current testers would accept it. And so the approach that we took was to kind of do a couple of areas as like a basic test of what it might be like, and see what people thought of that. And I guess people thought it was fine. I thought it was much better, but people thought it was like fine at that point. I think they were unconvinced that it was a good idea, but I think I was pretty convinced that it was going to be a better thing already at that point. We just kind of kept going and until it was done.
Yeah, it's probably worth mentioning that at that time, after I composed the white ending piece, you only had like $1,000 on your bank account left.
Yeah, I didn't have very much money, and it all kind of dovetailed with that I got a job at Lunark working on Islands of Insight. And so, you know, it was funny because like that last round of funding, I think I had asked for like $5,000 or something, because I thought like, yeah, I'm going to finish the game up in just a few months, right? And they were like, well, we think you should probably get 10 because you never know. And we like don't want to have to think about it that soon. But nevertheless, because I had started conditioning you and it was already running a little bit longer than I thought it would, I was running out of money, and I was just thinking, oh no. But yeah, luckily I got that job at Lunark, and so it was really like pretty much open-ended at that point, as long as you had the sanity to work on it. I could certainly afford to recompose it, so we went about that. Although I don't know when exactly we decided that we were going to release in September. I just know like we thought that everything would be doable by then, but it didn't quite squeeze in everything still.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I think you just at the beginning you asked me like how much time do you think it's going to take to recompose the music for the entire game, and I said something like 2 or 3 months. I didn't really know, but
Yeah, I
it
think
ended up taking 4.5 months
right.
before the release, but I did some more work on it after the release.
Yeah. Okay, so then the question would be, this is sort of like not a question for me, but maybe a question that's interesting for the audience, which is like, out of all that music, what was like the most challenging thing to compose for the game? This is following up on our earlier foreshadowing.
So the next version of the wide ending piece was the most challenging piece. The second most challenging one was the Taiji piece, which is in the end game area in the game, and it's the first piece on the album. Yeah, so the first white ending piece that you thought was so good, like after 4.5 months later, it seemed not so good, and it didn't like fit the rest of the music anymore, because like at the beginning, in the first month or so, like we changed we were just trying to figure out the style, and it changed a lot. So
there were a lot of like thematic ideas that had become present throughout the rest of the music that were not in that first piece because they weren't conceived of at that point, and so it kind of needed to be redone to maintain those themes.
Yeah, but also like outside of that, like if you just look at the like first version of the first areas we rescored was the orchard and mill, like the first versions of that were pretty different from what we ended up with, because we just like were experimenting for the first month, and eventually we figured it out after 3 weeks or a month. And so then we needed to like once we were sure that this is what we were going to do, then we needed to go back to those areas to like make them fit the more the areas that we made the music for more recently.
Yeah, I mean, most things in the game were really like that. So it's kind of just a normal game dev process thing. Like the thing you did early on seemed good then, but now it doesn't seem as good as the stuff that you did later, so you have to like go redo it. So are those pieces that you think were the hardest to compose, or those like the ones you're the most proud of, or are there ones that you like better?
No, actually the Taiji piece I think is like the worst piece in terms of mix on the album. And I think I need to like on the 5th anniversary of Taiji I'm going to do like a better mix of that piece, because I'm like, you know, I have those large playlists. I have this large playlist on YouTube of instrumental pieces that I like, and the Taiji, all of the pieces from Taiji are included in that playlist. And when that track starts playing, it's like, oh no, I have to. It's not good.
Oh, okay. So that's
and the other thing that is like that is actually like the beginning of the white ending piece, which is called White on the soundtrack album. It's like not mixed well. Like the problem with the Taiji piece is that it's like, so one of the ideas that is in the music was that we have like a lot of reverb on everything, and that just doesn't really work that well if you have that many instruments playing at the same time and you like want to hear all of them, because then like the mix is too muddy. But nevertheless, like I wanted the Taiji piece to be like sort of like be like give you the idea of what the music is like in the game. So that's why I like kept a lot of reverb in there, but it doesn't really work that well. But also it's like in general it's like hard. It's like the hardest piece to mix in the game, and at the time I wasn't experienced in mixing music as much as I am now. So
what are you most proud of?
well, I let me just pull out soundtrack here, and I like Mill piece a lot. I like Shrine, which you composed, but I guess we were just talking about my pieces. So I like Mill a lot. I like Orchard a lot, which we both composed. I like Graveyard, Reflection. I like the end game pieces quite a lot, although like people don't seem to like they have the least amount of views on YouTube. So that's interesting. I like Black and Chaos a lot as well. I guess the piece that I like the least is Order, but it's kind of it's like the idea of this piece is that it's like orderly, so it must be kind of boring. So it is kind of boring, but
it's better than the one
idea.
I had. It's better than one I did.
Yeah, it's a little bit better than your piece. It's yeah.
I don't think that the only thing in the game that musically I always was a little disappointed in was the plateaus. Everything else I think is really good. And some of those that you mentioned I do particularly like. I really like the Graveyard. The Graveyard one came out like really lush in an interesting way. And then the music there is to me much better than the art. Okay. So, I feel like it's about time for us to wrap the podcast up.
Okay.
But I wanted to ask one question that's like about the podcast, because this whole podcast idea was sort of your idea. So I kind of wondered what was like the overall motivations for it. Obviously, it's like the 3-year anniversary of Taiji, and that's like a proximal reason, but there must be some interesting motivation or some story. I don't know.
Yeah, so I'm making a music-based puzzle game, and one of the hardest things in terms of developing a game is marketing a game. And I had an idea that, well, maybe I'm going to do some videos for my YouTube channel to market my game, and one of the ideas was that I was going to do video devlogs for my game, and I was going to do. I had this idea for a video essay about which really I was going to do that video essay like right after finishing the work on Taiji, but at that time it seemed like, well, it's going to be too hard to do it. So like instead we just did this PDF that is part of the soundtrack album if you purchase it. Although most of the stuff that is in that PDF is also like available for free in the descriptions of my Taiji soundtrack YouTube videos. And it's also on Bandcamp. But anyway, so another idea was that I was going to start a podcast on which I was going to invite some indie game developers. And the first podcast episode I was going to do with you, obviously.
Oh, okay.
And it was going to be on Taiji anniversary, third anniversary.
Okay.
And I would do like an episode every month, but then like, well, I was working on this video essay for much longer than I expected to, and And recently I thought, well, it's like very close to Taiji anniversary already, so like maybe I'll release this video essay on Taiji release anniversary. So then like but I was also going to do this podcast, so but I thought it would be weird if like all of the Taiji anniversary things were on my YouTube channel and there was nothing on your YouTube channel.
Oh, okay.
So that's why we decided that the podcast is going to be on your YouTube channel, and obviously the video essay is going to my channel, and there are also free long relaxing music and ambience video on my channel. So
yeah, so well, if you've made it this far in watching this, then you should definitely check out Gregory's video essay about music that he did in Taiji, and also just music's kind of connection between music and game design in games in general. So Gregory has some interesting thoughts about that, and that's in a more organized and condensed form. Also, I have playtested an early version of Gregory's upcoming music focused puzzle game, music themed puzzle game. I'm not sure what you would call it.
You could say music-based puzzle game.
Music-based puzzle game. And it is a very interesting game. It's very unique and strange, and I don't envy his challenge in trying to market a game that's mostly about audio. But it is a cool game, so, keep an eye out for that. And, well, maybe we'll do another one of these in another year. Right now, my voice is pretty much blistered. So I think I'm done talking for today and possibly for the rest of the weekend. But I've enjoyed doing it, even though I'm very sweaty. So I'd be happy to do it again.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess that's that. So thanks for watching, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.